Hello. First time here? Welcome. If you're back for more, it's great to have you. Where are you watching from and what time is it? Drop a comment below. Now sit back and relax. I'm 22, and I moved into a really nice apartment about 4 months ago. For the first 3 months, nothing out of the ordinary happened at all. No strange noises, nothing falling mysteriously, just a normal experience. But now, the events that have been unfolding are even weirder because of how everything had been so calm before. It's also worth mentioning that I've never had any paranormal experiences, nor was I ever interested in them until recently. It all started around 2 weeks ago, and the only word that truly fits what's been happening to me is bizarre. 2 weeks ago, I was wrapping up a movie, and I remember it being exactly 1 a.m. when I turned off the lights and went to the bathroom, just like I'd done every night since moving in. When I flipped on the light, I saw a man briefly flash before me. He had something that looked like a top hat, but not quite. Honestly, I don't know how to describe it. His face had black markings, and the rest of his face was completely white, not pale, but stark white. His hands were also white, and he wore something that resembled an old trench coat. I can't recall much else. The moment I turned on the light, he was there for just a fraction of a second, but the look in his eyes was so evil, I can't quite put it into words. That's why I'm sharing this now. I'm terrified of what I felt. I screamed at the top of my lungs, something I've never done before, and I ran to the living room, flicked on the light, and ended up sleeping on the couch that night with the TV on. The next day, I tried to convince myself that it was just a hallucination, but it felt so real, like a physical figure standing in my bathroom. It didn't feel like a ghost. It felt tangible. The day after that, I was working on my computer when I heard what sounded like one of my glass cups breaking in the kitchen. It terrified me, especially because it was loud. I was hesitant to check it out, knowing it could somehow be related to what I had seen the night before. When I went into the kitchen, I found a framed photo on the floor, face down, surrounded by glass pieces. It was a photo I loved. It had been a gift from a close friend just before she moved to Stockholm. The photo showed the two of us in front of the Colosseum. We both share a love for Italy, and while it might not seem like much, it was incredibly special to me. Seeing it shattered on the floor made me feel more sad than scared. The photo was torn right down the middle, splitting us apart. I was furious. I yelled out, "Fuck you," because I just put that picture up when I moved in. For the next week, nothing else happened, until one night, I woke up in a panic. I haven't woken up in the middle of the night since I was a child. I usually sleep soundly. I looked around my room, but nothing seemed out of place. Then, about 15 seconds later, I heard something coming from the living room, fading into the kitchen. The noise was really strange, almost like the sound of someone sprinting. I didn't make a sound, staying completely still in bed, trying not to even shift the blankets to avoid any noise. I can honestly say I was more scared than when I saw the figure in the bathroom. My heart was probably pounding at about 60 beats per minute. I stayed awake for about an hour and a half, until I eventually drifted off to sleep by accident. I know it was stupid to stay in bed and not check for a burglar or something, but I can't even describe how terrified I was in that moment. The next day, everything in my apartment seemed fine, nothing out of place. The night after, I decided to sleep on the couch, but I woke up to a noise that I can't even begin to explain. If you held a gun to my head, I still wouldn't be able to put it into words. It was absolutely disgusting to hear. It sounded like it was coming from my bedroom, though I couldn't pinpoint it exactly. All the lights were on, so I wasn't as scared, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep after hearing that. As I sat up, I noticed a tiny amount of blood on my pants. I pulled them down to figure out where it came from and saw scratch marks. 3 streaks on my skin. I was bleeding, though not much, but it was definitely fresh. I was, of course, freaked out because I had no idea where those scratches came from. I went to the kitchen to clean myself up, avoiding the bathroom completely. Ever since then, I've occasionally heard that same sound again, though no words can fully convey how disturbing it is. It's like a high-pitched, raspy melody in a man's voice. I really can't afford to move right now, but whatever this is, it's clearly not friendly. This is all really strange, so I don't expect any concrete help, but I'd appreciate hearing what you all would do in my situation. Update 1 asterisk. Thank you to everyone who's been giving me advice. It's really comforting to hear from people who know about the paranormal. I listened to the audio from last night, and I didn't hear anything. I'll keep you updated if anything changes. Update 2 asterisk. Hey everyone, my coat rack just flew across the room. I'm really starting to get scared now. This is escalating in a way I didn't expect. Should I try using sage or something? I'm starting to feel desperate. I've heard that sage can sometimes make things worse, though. I'm going to attempt recording audio again tonight. I'll keep you all posted. Update 3 asterisk. So, the bathroom door just slammed shut with a loud bang, and I heard things crashing into the wall. When I finally got the courage to open the door, my medicine cabinet was wide open, and everything had been thrown into the bathtub. This is getting way too real, and honestly, I don't know how much more of this I can handle. People keep saying not to show fear, but the truth is, I'm terrified all day, every day, just waiting for the next thing to happen. I might ask to stay at a friend's place for a while, but what good will that do? Eventually, I'll have to return to my apartment. I need to figure out how to get rid of whatever this is like right now. Update 4 asterisk. So, I was lying on my couch, and I put my glass of water down on the floor next to me. When I reached for it, it was completely gone, and I still haven't found it. I only had 3 sips and set it down. Where could it have possibly gone? I woke up to a cold body, my skin chilled to the touch. The faint sound of rain tapping on the tense fabric drifted to my ears as I slowly stirred from my sleep. It felt like I had overslept a bit, so I sat up and checked the time on my phone. It was 3 a.m. This was my 3rd day of camping, and while I had been looking forward to the trip, things were starting to feel a little repetitive. I noticed that Jessica wasn't in the tent with me. Maybe she had gone to the bathroom? There were 15 other campers on the reserve with us, and our tents were all fairly close together. The chaperones were staying in cabins about 800 feet away. I texted Jessica, "Where are you, Braceface?" But 20 minutes passed with no response. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't imagine her being in someone else's tent. Jessica is very particular about the people she hangs out with, and besides, we weren't allowed to go into each other's tents. Just as I was about to leave the tent to look for her, a flash of thunder startled me, and I froze, sinking back down onto my pillow. The rain began to pour heavily. Jessica's going to be mad her hair's wet, I thought to myself, assuming she'd gone to the bathroom. I settled back into the warmth of my sleeping bag, listening to the rain outside. About an hour later, a loud noise suddenly snapped me awake. It was the most disturbing sound I had ever heard. It was blood-curdling, like a banshee's scream. At that point, I was genuinely concerned. Jessica still hadn't returned to the tent, and when I checked my phone, I saw she hadn't texted me back. That was strange. I knew it was time to stop being a wimp and get out of the tent. I couldn't believe that anyone could sleep through that noise, but to my surprise, everyone else was sound asleep. I pulled my jacket hood over my head and began walking toward the cabins. There was something strange about the feeling I had as I walked, like someone was behind me. "Calm down. I'm overreacting," I whispered to myself. It was a full moon, and its light illuminated the reserve, making it easier to see where I was going. The rain drenched my hoodie and soaked my shoes as I carefully stepped around mud puddles. When I reached the cabin, I saw something jammed against the entrance. These cabins were made of logs, so I wasn't sure what could be blocking the door. Using my foot, I nudged the object loose. After a couple of hard pushes, the body of a gray cat tumbled out. It was dead. My heart sank into my stomach as fear gripped me. Who or what could have done something like that? It felt like too much was happening at once. I still needed to find Jessica, but the storm wasn't making it easy. I tried the handle of the cabin door, only to find it locked. Strange, since our chaperones always left it open for campers to use the bathroom. Now I was even more confused about where Jessica could be. Then, I noticed that the moonlight had vanished completely. Suddenly, a faint sound, some sort of animal or creature, seemed to be coming from behind me. Whatever it was, I could tell it was a few feet away. My entire body felt ice cold as I faced the cabin door. There was no way I was turning around to see what the thing was. I start to hear footsteps move very slowly in the mud. It grunted in a low tone as it made its way towards me. I could tell this was not the presence of something small. It's time for me to make a move. I bang as loud as I can on the cabin, shouting for help in between knocks. A few moments later, my chaperone opens the door, yawning and squinting in confusion. I quickly move past her and close the door behind me. "You're getting mud all over the floor," says Miss Kelly in agitation. After I catch my breath, I explain to her what was going on, or at least what I thought. Even after going into detail about everything, she responded in a laugh and groggily asked me did I need to use the bathroom. Well, that was clearly pointless. I take a few moments to get myself together and ask Miss Kelly to walk me back to my tent. She was irritated that I asked, but she agreed to do it anyway. She grabs an umbrella from a closet and we head back. As I get to my tent and climb inside, I notice that Jessica is laying down. I tap her shoulder and ask her where she was. Apparently, she was in another tent the entire time with a classmate she had a crush on. Midway between us talking, I hear that same blood-curdling scream from earlier. We both sit up and stare at each other in astonishment. Jessica says, "So you've heard it too?" My heart drops to my stomach. "Look, I know we joke a lot, but please just listen to what I'm about to tell you. I have a feeling that's not an animal out there," I explained. Jessica's face had skepticism written all over it. She whispers, "You're not seriously suggesting that there's a ghost or something out there, are you? It's probably one of the girls playing around." "You didn't feel what I felt out there," I say in conviction. "When I was heading to the cabin, there was something behind me, and it didn't sound like a bear, a wolf, or a snake. That was something different." Shortly after we continue to discuss what's going on, we decide to just head back to sleep until morning. Even with her hearing the noise herself, she refused to believe me. It made me question my own reality. Am I crazy? I woke up the next morning to the sound of distant voices talking in a frenzy. Jessica and I climb out of the tent and head to the bonfire a few feet up ahead. Mostly everyone, including our chaperone, was outside in a circle around the burning ember. "Have a seat, guys," says Miss Kelly as she takes a deep sigh. "I'm assuming you two have no clue where Michael and Kenny are. Do you?" Jessica and I look at each other in confusion. "No, I haven't seen them. What exactly is going on?" I respond in curiosity. "Just an hour ago, I went to check on everybody before I began roll call. They weren't in their tents, and I have no idea what's going on. Listen, if this is a joke, guys, you gotta stop this. I have to." Suddenly, out of nowhere, Michael and Kenny stumble out of the woods and onto the ground in exhaustion. Their eyes were bloodshot red. We all rush over to console them both and ask what happened. They would say a few words, but it was mostly gibberish. Michael had no shirt on and Kenny's white shirt was covered in dirt. They looked completely terrified. "All right, this camping adventure is officially over. I don't get paid enough for this," Miss Kelly shouts in agitation. "Please don't say I told you so," says Jessica as we walk back to our tent. When I wished for a memorable trip, this wasn't what I had in mind. Before my brother moved out of state, we used to hike together frequently. One of our favorite places was a river about 15 minutes from our house. By the time this incident occurred, he had already moved, and I hadn't gone hiking in a while. I typically don't hike alone, but it had been a beautiful day, and I was craving some fresh air. For context, I was 19 and a female at the time. The drive to the river was stunning. I lived in the suburbs, so it didn't take long before the houses and businesses faded away, leaving only thickening vegetation as I approached the river. Once I reached the parking lot, I parked my car, grabbed my backpack, locked the doors, and began walking toward the river, which was just a short distance away. The parking lot was spacious, able to accommodate about 50 cars. but there were only a handful of vehicles there that day. I passed the restroom building and some trash cans on my right and noticed some campers by the river to the left, at least 30 yards away. There was a walking trail beside the river, which was the one we usually took, and I headed toward it. As I got closer, I decided to turn right to avoid disturbing the campers. Once I started walking alongside the river, I heard a voice call out to me from behind. I turned around to see who it was. It was an older man, probably in his late 40s or early 50s. He was coming up from the campsite and asked if I had a cigarette. I wasn't a smoker, so I politely told him I didn't. As I glanced past him, I realized the campers weren't just visiting. They seemed to be living there. He shrugged it off and said, "No worries." I gave him a polite smile, turned back around, and continued my hike. After about 30 to 45 minutes, I started feeling uneasy being alone, and that sense of discomfort kept growing. I stopped to drink some water and took out my pocket knife, holding it just in case I encountered an animal or something else. The day had warmed up, so I removed my jacket, draping it over my arm, which conveniently concealed the knife. I decided to retrace my steps, nearly back to where I started, when I noticed the older man walking toward me again. He called out to me. I stopped to see what he needed. To my surprise, he asked if I wanted to hang out with him and the others. I declined, saying I needed to head home. As I started walking away, he asked for my number and grabbed my tank top. I told him I wasn't interested and pulled away. He kept holding on to my tank top for a moment, as if hesitating, before finally letting go. It felt like forever, and I was terrified, but I was grateful to have the knife in my hand in case he decided to do something worse. I quickly started walking back toward my car, then broke into a run once I was close enough. Once I was safely inside my car, I locked the doors immediately and sped off. I'll never know what his intentions were or what might have happened if I stayed, but I haven't hiked alone since that day. I should have known better than to trust strangers in the woods. But after days of hiking alone, any friendly face felt like a blessing. That's the excuse I gave myself when I met them. There were 4 locals, all wearing easy smiles and eager to show me a hidden spot they swore I had to see. Little did I know, those smiles would be the last thing I'd remember before everything changed. The Appalachian Trail had been my escape from a messy breakup and a job loss that had left me reeling. After 3 days of hiking, my legs were sore, and my backpack grew heavier with each step, but my mind had finally found some peace. The sound of crunching leaves under my boots and the wind rustling through the trees was the perfect soundtrack, drowning out my troubled thoughts. I was resting at a trail junction, studying my map, when I heard voices approaching. 2 men and 2 women appeared around the corner, laughing and chatting as if they were old friends out for a casual walk. They looked like they belonged in the area. Flannel shirts, worn jeans, and hiking boots that had clearly seen better days. The oldest of the group, a man with salt and pepper hair and crow's feet around his eyes, waved at me with a friendly smile. "Hey there, hiker, taking on the solo?" His voice had a warm southern drawl to it. I nodded, realizing how long it had been since I'd last spoken to someone. "Yeah, just me on the trail." The man introduced himself as Ray and quickly introduced the others. Mike, Sarah, and Lisa. They asked about my hike, where I was from, typical small talk. It felt refreshing, almost normal, to engage with people again. "You know," Ray said, leaning in a little closer with a grin, "if you're looking for a real view, we know a spot just off the trail. Most hikers miss it, since it's not on the maps." I paused for a moment. Everything in me screamed to stay on the marked trail, to avoid following strangers into the woods. But they seemed so friendly, so excited to share something they loved. After all, hiking was about discovering hidden gems, right? "It's not far," Sarah added with a smile, her eyes sparkling. "Maybe half an hour tops. The view of the valley is amazing, especially with the leaves changing this time of year." Before I could stop myself, I found myself nodding. "Sure, why not? Lead the way." We left the main trail behind, with Ray taking the lead and Mike bringing up the rear. Sarah and Lisa walked alongside me, casually chatting about the history of the area and pointing out interesting plants as we went. At first, the path was barely more than a faint game trail, but as we ventured deeper, even that faded away. The forest grew thicker, and the canopy overhead blocked out more and more light. The group's friendly chatter slowed and eventually stopped, replaced by the sound of our footsteps and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. I tried to keep track of our route, but the trees all started to look the same, and I lost my sense of direction. A nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach told me something wasn't right. The half-hour mark came and went, and still we pressed on. The incline grew steeper, the underbrush thicker. My legs burned with the effort, and I had to use my hands to push aside branches that seemed to grab at my clothes. How much further? I asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. Ray glanced back at me, his earlier warmth replaced by a cool, appraising look. Not far now. You're not getting tired, are you? There was something in his tone, a hint of mockery perhaps, that sent a chill down my spine. I forced a smile. No, just curious. We continued on in silence. I noticed the others had spread out, forming a loose circle around me. Every time I slowed or changed direction slightly, one of them was there, subtly hurting me back on course. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was being corralled. My heart began to race, and I felt sweat beating on my forehead despite the cool air. I tried to calm myself to rationalize the situation. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe the secret spot really was just ahead. But as we entered a small clearing, I knew in my bones that I had made a terrible mistake. There was no breathtaking view, no valley spread out before us, just a small, unremarkable space surrounded by dense forest. Ray stopped and turned to face me, and the others closed ranks, forming a tight circle. Well, Ray said, his voice no longer friendly. Looks like we made it. I spun around looking for a gap, an escape route, but found none. They had positioned themselves perfectly, cutting off any chance of flight. What is this? I demanded, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound strong. Where's the view you promised? Mike, who had barely spoken during the hike, let out a low chuckle. Oh, there's a view, all right. Just not the one you were expecting. Sarah stepped closer, her earlier warmth replaced by a predatory gleam in her eyes. You really shouldn't have come with us, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But then again, they never learn, do they? My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Who were these people? What did they want? The weight of my backpack suddenly felt suffocating, and I shrugged it off, ready to run if I saw even the slightest opening. Listen, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know what's going on here, but I don't want any trouble. Just let me go, and I'll forget this ever happened. Ray stepped forward, closing the distance between us. He was close enough now that I could smell his breath, a mix of coffee and something metallic. Oh, sweetheart, he said, his voice low and menacing. Trouble found you the moment you stepped off that trail. In that instant, I knew I had to act or die. With a surge of adrenaline, I swung my backpack as hard as I could, catching Ray square in the chest. He stumbled backward, surprise replacing the smug look on his face. I didn't wait to see their reactions. I ran, crashing through the underbrush. I didn't care about direction or stealth. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and those people as possible. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but I kept moving. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. They knew these woods had the advantage of numbers, but I had the desperate energy of someone fighting for their life. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but I didn't dare stop. The forest all looked the same. Endless trees and undergrowth with no sign of the trail or civilization. As the adrenaline began to wear off, panic set in. I was lost, alone in unfamiliar woods with no supplies and no idea which direction would lead me to safety. For all I knew, I was running deeper into their territory. The sun was setting, the forest growing darker by the minute. I knew I couldn't keep running blindly. I needed to find shelter, to hide and catch my breath. A fallen tree caught my eye, its massive trunk and upturned roots creating a natural hollow. I crawled into the space, pressing myself as far back as I could. The earthy smell of decaying leaves filled my nostrils as I tried to quiet my ragged breathing. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a fresh wave of terror through me. As full darkness descended, the forest came alive with night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the scurrying of small animals. But underlying it all was a tense silence, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. I don't know how long I huddled there, shivering from cold and fear. My mind conjured terrifying images. Ray and his group finding me, dragging me out of my hiding place. What would they do to me? Why had they lured me out here? At some point, exhaustion must have overtaken me because I jolted awake to the sound of voices. Distant at first, but growing closer. I held my breath, pressing myself further into my hiding spot. She couldn't have gotten far. I heard Ray's voice, closer than I would have liked. Fan out and keep looking. She's got to be around here somewhere. The sound of footsteps crunching through the leaves echoed around me, stopping every so often as they searched the area. I could hear them calling to one another, their voices growing fainter as they combed the woods. My heart hammered in my chest, so loudly I thought for sure they'd hear it. A beam of light swept over my hiding spot, and I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to blend into the shadows. The footsteps grew closer, the leaves cracking just inches from where I lay. "Hey, Ray," Mike's voice called out. "I think I found something over here." The footsteps moved away, and I finally allowed myself to exhale. But I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. It was only a matter of time before they found me. As their voices faded into the distance, I steeled myself for the next step. I had to move. I had to escape the woods before they circled back around. Crawling out from my hiding place, I tried to orient myself in the darkness. The moonlight filtered through the trees, offering just enough illumination to distinguish shapes, but not much else. I chose a direction and began moving, trying to keep as quiet as possible. Every step felt like a mistake. Every rustling shadow seemed to hide a lurking danger. But I had no choice. Staying still meant they'd find me. I couldn't let that happen. I don't know how long I walked or how far I traveled. Time became irrelevant in the blackness of the forest. Eventually, however, I saw a faint glow through the trees. Light, civilization. I stumbled onto a road and flagged down the first car that passed. The elderly couple inside looked startled by my appearance. Scratched, filthy, and wide-eyed. But they didn't hesitate to take me to the nearest police station. I told them everything. The police went to search the area, but there was no sign of Ray or the others. No trace of the clearing where they'd trapped me. It was as though they had vanished into the very forest itself. I never finished my hike. The Appalachian Trail, once my refuge, became the stuff of nightmares. But sometimes, when the wind rustles through the trees on a dark night, I can't help but wonder about those woods. And I shudder, knowing that somewhere, out there, Ray and his group are likely on the hunt for their next unsuspecting victim. The moment I stepped out of my car, I knew I had made a huge mistake. The air was unnervingly still, broken only by the faint ticking of my engine cooling down. I should have kept driving, should have trusted my instincts, but I didn't, and that choice nearly cost me everything. It was supposed to be a simple, familiar drive home, just 4 hours down a highway I had traveled countless times. But as night crept in and the miles stacked up, fatigue started to settle in. The white lines on the road blurred together, and I found myself fighting to stay awake, nodding off more than once. I decided to pull over, just for a second, to shake off the tiredness and clear my mind. That's when I saw it. A pile of debris blocking the road. Logs, branches, and what looked like chunks of concrete scattered across both lanes. I slowed and came to a stop, my headlights illuminating the obstruction. It didn't make sense. There hadn't been any roadwork signs, no warnings. Just this sudden, unexpected barrier in the middle of nowhere. I put the car in park and stepped out. The gravel crunched under my feet. The night was unnervingly quiet. No crickets chirping, no distant sound of traffic, just the faint rustle of wind through the trees lining the road. As I moved closer to the debris, something felt wrong. The way it was arranged seemed too deliberate, too carefully placed to be the result of a fallen tree or a landslide. The logs were stacked with intention. The branches were woven together in a manner that screamed human interference. I glanced back at my car, then looked down the road in both directions. There were no other vehicles in sight, just me, my car, and this inexplicable roadblock. I pulled out my phone, hoping for a signal, but the screen mocked me with its no service message. Of course, why would anything be easy? I sighed, realizing I'd have to move the debris myself if I wanted to get through. As I bent down to grab one of the logs, a flicker of movement at the edge of my headlights caught my eye, a set of fresh footprints leading off into the woods. My heart stopped. The earth around them was still disturbed. Someone had been here, and recently. I straightened up, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting the words as they left my mouth. My voice felt tiny and fragile in the vast, dark silence. No answer came, but I could have sworn I heard a twig snap somewhere in the shadows beyond the road. I should have gotten back in my car right then, should have driven off as fast as I could. But curiosity, the same human trait that often leads to our undoing, took over. I took a few steps toward the tree line, squinting to see further into the darkness. That's when I heard the low rumble of an engine. Relief washed over me. Another car was approaching. I wasn't alone out here after all. I turned back toward the road, ready to flag down the driver and ask for help. But my relief was short-lived. There, idling about 50 yards behind my car, was a truck. Its headlights were off, the engine purring quietly. I hadn't heard it pull up, hadn't seen any lights approaching. It was as if it had materialized out of the darkness. "Hey," I called out, waving my arms. "Can you help me? The road's blocked." The truck didn't move. I couldn't make out the driver through the windshield, just a dark silhouette behind the wheel. A chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right. I started walking back to my car, trying to keep my pace steady despite the panic rising in my chest. The truck's driver's side door opened with a creak that seemed to echo in the still night air. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his features hidden in shadow. "Need some help?" His voice was deep, casual, but there was an undercurrent to it that set my teeth on edge. I stopped, my hand on my car door handle. "Yeah, there's a bunch of debris blocking the road. I was just about to try and clear it." He started walking toward me, his gait slow and deliberate. "Nasty business that happens sometimes out here. Folks aren't careful about what they're carrying." As he got closer, I could make out more details. He was wearing a thick jacket despite the mild weather, his hands shoved deep in the pockets. A baseball cap pulled low obscured most of his face. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, now just a few feet away. "Never know what kind of trouble you might run into." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Every instinct was screaming at me to get in the car and drive. Debris be damned. But he was too close now. If I made a move, he'd be on me before I could close the door. "I'm fine," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. "My husband is expecting me. He'll be worried if I'm late." The man chuckled, a low sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Is that so funny? I didn't see a ring on your finger when you were waving your arms about earlier." Ice flooded my veins. He'd been watching me. For how long? Had he been there when I first pulled up? "Look," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I don't want any trouble. Why don't you go on ahead? I'll figure out how to get around this mess." He took another step closer. I could smell him now, a mixture of cigarette smoke and something metallic. "Oh, I don't think you'll be going anywhere for a while." That's when I heard it, movement in the woods behind me. More than one person by the sound of it. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the full extent of the trap I'd walked into. The man smiled, and in the dim light, I saw the glint of teeth. Like I said, folks aren't careful about what they're carrying out here. Sometimes things fall off trucks. Sometimes those things are valuable. And sometimes, well, sometimes we need to make sure no one interrupts while we collect our lost property. I didn't think. I just acted. In one fluid motion, I yanked open my car door and threw myself inside. The man lunged forward, his hand grasping for my arm, but I slammed the door shut just in time. His fist pounded on the window as I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life just as more men emerged from the woods. 3 of them running toward my car with purposeful strides. I threw the car into reverse, tires squealing as I backed up. The man who had spoken to me dove out of the way, rolling across the asphalt. I spun the wheel, the car fishtailing as I turned it around. In my rear view mirror, I saw the men running back to the truck. The engine gunned to life, headlights flaring in the darkness. I didn't hesitate. I slammed on the gas, my car lurching forward. The debris loomed ahead, but I didn't slow down. I aimed for the section that looked least dense and prayed. The impact was jarring. My teeth rattled as the car bounced and scraped over the logs and branches. Something cracked underneath. Probably my oil pan, a distant part of my mind supplied. But the car kept moving. I was through. The road ahead was clear, and I pushed the gas pedal to the floor. The truck was behind me now, its headlights growing larger in my mirror. They were gaining on me. My damaged car no match for their truck on this straight stretch of highway. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I needed to think, needed to find a way out of this nightmare. Up ahead, I saw a turnoff, a narrow road that disappeared into the woods. It was risky. I had no idea where the road led, but staying on the main path wasn't an option. I waited until the last possible moment, then yanked the wheel to the right. My car skidded, tires screeching as I made the sharp turn. The truck sped past the turnoff, unable to slow down in time. I had gained only a few precious seconds. The road was rough, more dirt than pavement, and my car rattled and shook with each bump. But I couldn't afford to slow down. Trees blurred past me on both sides, branches scraping against the windows. I drove blindly, taking random turns, hoping I was putting enough distance between myself and whoever was chasing me. After what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only a few minutes, I saw lights ahead. A gas station, its fluorescent glow a promise of safety in the dark. I swerved into the parking lot, honking the horn, and threw myself out of the car. The attendant looked startled as I burst through the door, wild-eyed and rambling about men chasing me. He quickly called the police while I crouched behind the counter, flinching at every noise. When the officers arrived, they found no trace of the truck or the men. They drove me back to the scene, but the debris was gone. The road was as clear as if nothing had happened. They were kind but skeptical. No evidence, no crime. I sold my car shortly after that night. I couldn't bear to look at it, the dents and scratches reminding me of how close I'd come to. What? I don't even know. I don't drive that road anymore. In fact, I avoid driving altogether if I can. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see that man's smile, hear the footsteps in the woods, and I can't help but wonder, with a shudder, how many others have fallen into that trap on that desolate stretch of road. How many weren't as lucky as I was? So if you're driving late at night and come across a blocked road in the middle of nowhere, don't stop. Don't get out of your car. Just turn around and drive away as fast as you can. You never know who might be lurking in the darkness, waiting to spring a trap. You might not escape. The first light of dawn filtered through the canopy, casting strange, elongated shadows across the forest floor. As I unzipped my tent, an icy shiver ran down my spine, and it wasn't from the morning chill. Something felt off wrong. The woods, once familiar and peaceful, now seemed alien, menacing. And there, carved deeply into the bark of the nearest tree, was a symbol I didn't recognize. It was intricate, unsettling, and disturbingly fresh. I had always been a solitary person, drawn more to the quiet of nature than the noise of human interaction. Solo camping trips were my retreat, my way of recharging. This trip had been planned as a week-long escape into one of the most remote parts of the national forest. No cell service, no other campers, just me and the wilderness. The first 2 days had been perfect. I'd hiked far into the backcountry, setting up camp in a small clearing near a flowing stream. The solitude was everything I needed, a chance to clear my mind and leave the stress of daily life behind. But now, staring at that strange symbol, all sense of peace vanished. I moved toward the tree carefully, my fingers brushing the edges of the carving. It was deep, and the sap still clung to the wood. This wasn't here when I set up camp the night before. A twig snapped in the underbrush, and I whipped around, my heart racing. The forest suddenly felt alive with hidden dangers, each shadow concealing something I couldn't see. I forced myself to calm down, to reason with the situation. It was probably just an animal, or perhaps another hiker had passed by in the night. But as I scanned the area around my camp, my blood ran cold. The symbol wasn't just on one tree, it was everywhere. Every tree around my clearing had the same intricate carving, forming a perfect circle around my tent. A wave of panic gripped me. This wasn't a coincidence, nor some random act of vandalism. Someone or something had been here while I slept, marking the trees one by one. But why? I dashed back into my tent, hands trembling as I grabbed my backpack. I pulled out my compass and map, desperate to find my bearings and figure out how to get back to civilization as quickly as possible. But when I unfolded the map, my breath caught in my throat. There, scrawled onto the paper in what looked like blood, was the same symbol that surrounded my camp. A low, rhythmic chanting drifted through the trees, faint at first, as though I were imagining it, but it steadily grew louder, coming from all directions at once. The words were unlike anything I'd ever heard, guttural, ancient. Panic surged through me. I abandoned any thought of packing up the camp. Grabbing only my backpack and water bottle, I dashed out of the tent, eyes frantically scanning for the source of the chanting. The forest seemed to come alive. The trees looming closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I ran. I had no idea if I was going in the right direction, but I knew I had to get away from that clearing, away from those symbols and that terrifying chant. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, my lungs burning with each gasping breath. The chanting followed me, always just behind, always drawing closer no matter how fast I ran. Faces seemed to appear in the bark of the trees, twisted and mocking. More symbols flashed past, carved into every surface, each one filling me with a deep, primal dread. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that nightmarish flight through the forest. My legs ached, my lungs screamed for air, but still I pushed on, driven by pure animal fear. Finally, I burst through a line of trees and found myself on the edge of a small lake. The sudden openness was jarring after the claustrophobic density of the forest. For a moment, the chanting seemed to fade, and I allowed myself a flicker of hope. Maybe I'd outrun them, whoever or whatever they were. But as I bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath, I saw it. There, reflected in the still surface of the lake, was a sight that turned my blood to ice. Figures stood at the tree line behind me, dozens of them, their bodies oddly elongated and misshapen. They wore robes of bark and leaves, their faces hidden behind masks carved to resemble the symbols I'd seen on the trees. I straightened slowly, afraid to turn around, afraid to confirm what I was seeing in the lake's reflection. The chanting had stopped, replaced by an expectant silence that was somehow even more terrifying. Child of the outside world, a voice spoke, ancient and rasping, like dead leaves skittering across stone. You have trespassed in our domain. I turned, my whole body trembling. The figures stood motionless at the edge of the forest, an impenetrable line of living shadows. The one who had spoken took a step forward, its mask a nightmare of swirling patterns that seemed to move and shift as I watched. I'm sorry. I managed to croak out, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. I'll leave. Promise. Just please let me go. The figure tilted its head, an unnaturally fluid motion that sent shivers down my spine. Leave, it said, amusement coloring its inhuman voice. Oh no, child, you cannot leave. The forest has chosen you. You are part of it now. The other figures began to move forward. Spreading out to encircle the lakeshore, I backed away, water lapping at my heels. My mind raced, searching desperately for a way out, but I knew with sickening certainty that I was trapped. What do you want from me? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The lead figure raised its arms, the sleeves of its robe falling back to reveal hands that were more like twisted branches than flesh. We want what the forest wants, new life, new blood, a new vessel for the old magic. As if on cue, the other figures began chanting again, the sound rising and falling like waves. I felt a strange sensation in my feet and looked down to see tendrils of moss creeping up my legs, rooting me to the spot. Panic gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. With a desperate cry, I wrenched myself free from the suffocating moss and plunged into the lake. The water was shockingly cold, seizing the breath from my chest, but I pushed through, swimming with every ounce of strength I had toward the center of the lake. Behind me, I heard the relentless splashing as the figures followed, their chanting continuing without pause. I didn't dare glance back, focusing all my energy on creating distance between myself and those terrifying beings. My arms screamed with exhaustion, and my clothes, heavy with water, pulled me down, but still I swam. The far shore seemed impossibly far, yet it was my only chance. As I fought through the water, I felt something move beneath the surface. Long, slithering shapes brushing past my feet. Several times, I felt scales rasping against my skin as something unseen grazed me. Just as my strength was about to fail, my feet touched the lakebed. I stumbled, gasping, onto the shore, but there was no time to rest. I saw the figures still advancing, gliding through the water with an unnatural swiftness. I turned and fled into the forest, my soaked clothes clinging to my body, each step a painful effort. But something felt different now. The trees seemed to shift, parting before me, creating a path. Was I imagining it, or were the branches reaching out, guiding me forward? I ran until my legs buckled, collapsing onto the forest floor. As I lost consciousness, I had a strange sensation of being cradled, of roots and branches enveloping me in a protective embrace. When I woke, I found myself lying on the edge of the forest, the distant hum of a highway in the air. My clothes were dry, leaves and twigs tangled in my hair. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination born from isolation and exhaustion? But as I struggled to my feet, I saw it. On the inside of my wrist was a small symbol, identical to the ones carved into the trees. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And in that moment, I knew with chilling certainty that my ordeal had been all too real. I made my way to the highway and flagged down a passing car, overwhelmed with gratitude to return to civilization. But even as I settled into the passenger seat, I felt the pull of the forest. The symbol on my wrist tingled, a constant reminder of what had happened. I never went camping again after that. But sometimes, in my dreams, I hear the chanting, and I wonder if one day the forest might call me back to finish what it started. The sound that stirred me wasn't deafening. It was just a faint creak, the kind you expect to hear in old houses as they settle into the night. But in the dead silence of that vast, empty house, it felt as loud as a thunderclap. I lay there, heart racing, straining to hear anything else. Then it came again, a soft thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps from the attic above. I hadn't wanted to take the babysitting job in the first place. The Hendersons' house was on the outskirts of town, a massive Victorian mansion that looked like it belonged in a horror film. But the pay was good, and at 16, I needed every dollar I could earn for college. When I arrived earlier that evening, Mrs. Henderson had shown me around quickly. The house was a labyrinth of rooms and corridors, filled with antique furniture and eerie paintings. But it was the locked door at the end of the upstairs hallway that truly caught my attention. "Oh, that just leads to the attic," Mrs. Henderson had said dismissively when she noticed me staring at it. "It's full of junk. No need to go up there." Now, lying alone in the dark guest room, those words echoed in my head. If the attic door was locked, where were those footsteps coming from? I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, its blue glow cutting through the darkness. 2:37 a.m. The Hendersons weren't due back for hours. Another creak, closer this time. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent against the thick carpet. Part of me wanted to run, to leave the house and never look back. But I couldn't abandon the kids. 8-year-old Tyler and 6-year-old Emma were sleeping down the hall, unaware of the terror that was beginning to tighten its grip on me. I crept to the door and pressed my ear against it. The hallway outside was quiet, but the air felt different, heavier. Something was wrong, very wrong. I took a deep breath and slowly turned the doorknob, peeking out into the hallway. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. Everything seemed normal, but the sense of unease grew stronger. I crept down the hall to check on the kids. They were both sound asleep. Tyler sprawled across his bed, Emma hugging her favorite stuffed animal. I quietly closed their doors, not wanting to disturb them. That's when I saw it. At the end of the hallway, the attic door was ajar. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen, staring at the dark void before me. How could this be? The door had been locked. I'd seen Mrs. Henderson try the handle herself. As I stood there, paralyzed with fear, a shadow moved across the opening. Something was in the attic moving around. I should have woken the kids. I should have gotten them out of the house. But curiosity, that dangerous, irresistible force, propelled me forward. I had to know what was up there. Each step towards the attic door felt like an eternity. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, and I winced at each sound, sure that whatever was up there would hear me coming. But the noises from the attic continued, oblivious to my approach. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The darkness beyond seemed absolute, impenetrable. I fumbled with my phone, turning on its flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a narrow staircase leading up. I took the first step, then another. The stairs groaned under my weight, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet house. At the top, I paused, sweeping my light across the attic. It was a vast space, the ceiling following the slope of the roof. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight. The air was thick and stale with an underlying scent I couldn't quite place. Something musty and organic, like old leaves or damp earth. Piles of boxes and old furniture created a maze of shadows. As my light played across the room, I caught glimpses of odd shapes. A cracked mirror here, a weathered trunk there. But nothing seemed out of place. Nothing moved. I was about to turn back to convince myself I had imagined the whole thing when I saw it. In the far corner of the attic, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes, was a door that shouldn't exist, given the layout of the house. My feet moved of their own accord, drawing me closer to that impossible door. It was old, the wood warped and stained with age. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, curves and lines that hurt my eyes to look at directly. As I stood before it, my hand reached out almost against my will. My fingers brushed the rough wood, tracing one of the bizarre symbols. The door swung open. Beyond was not the outside of the house, as logic dictated there should be. Instead, I found myself staring into a room. No, not a room, a chamber. The walls were rough stone, glistening with moisture. Roots and vines snaked across the ceiling, pulsing slightly as if alive. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, a slab of black stone that seemed to absorb the light from my phone. And on that altar, I stumbled back. A scream lodged in my throat. What I saw defied explanation, defied reality itself. It was a shape, a form that shifted and writhed, never settling into anything recognizable. One moment it seemed almost human, the next it was a mass of tentacles and eyes. Then something else entirely. something my mind couldn't or wouldn't comprehend. As I watched, frozen in horror, the thing on the altar turned towards me. I felt its attention like a physical weight, crushing and invasive. It saw me. It knew me. I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, taking the attic stairs 3 at a time, not caring about the noise I made. I burst into the hallway, ready to grab the kids and flee the house. But the hallway wasn't there. I found myself in a long stone corridor, identical to the chamber I had just fled. The same roots crawled across the ceiling. The same moisture glistened on the walls. And at the end of the corridor, another door waited, its surface carved with those maddening symbols. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't possible. I was still in the house. I had to be. But as I turned, I saw that the attic door had vanished. There was only smooth stone where it had been. A sound echoed down the corridor, a wet, slithering noise that set my teeth on edge. It was coming closer. I ran again, this time towards the door at the end of the corridor. I didn't want to open it, didn't want to see what new horror waited beyond, but I had no choice. As my hand touched the handle, I heard a voice. No, it wasn't a voice. It was a thought, pushing its way into my mind. "Welcome home," it said, not in words, but in a form of communication beyond language, in a tone that wasn't sound but pure, unfiltered meaning. "We've been waiting for you." I woke up screaming. The sunlight poured through the guest room windows. I was tangled in the sheets, drenched in sweat. For a moment, I lay there, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was just a dream. But then I saw it. There, on my hand, was a symbol, a strange, eye-watering shape, just like the ones I'd seen etched into that impossible door. It stood out against my skin, dark and sharp, as if it had been branded there. A knock at the door made me jump. "Hello," Mrs. Henderson's voice called from the hallway. "Is everything all right in there?" I stared at the symbol on my hand, my mind spinning. What had happened last night? What had been real and what had been a dream? "Everything's fine," I managed to reply, my voice trembling. "I'll be out in a minute." As I dressed, I tried to process everything. The symbol on my hand was definitely real, but the rest, the attic, the door, the thing on the altar, couldn't have been. Could it? I made my way downstairs where the Hendersons and the kids were already having breakfast. Everything seemed normal. Sunlight filled the kitchen, and the smell of coffee and bacon hung in the air. Tyler and Emma chattered excitedly about their plans for the day. "Did you sleep well?" Mr. Henderson asked as he handed me a cup of coffee. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. As I brought the cup to my lips, I caught Mrs. Henderson staring at my hand, at the symbol. Our eyes met, and in that instant I knew. She knew exactly what had happened. She had known all along. "We should talk," she said softly, her smile never fading. "After breakfast." As I sat at the table, a cold shiver ran down my spine. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, how was I going to escape? The symbol on my hand seemed to throb, a silent reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be shut again. The first thing I noticed when I walked into my new home was the smell. It wasn't the musty scent of an old house or the sharp, chemical tang of fresh paint. No, this was something else entirely. A sickly sweet odor that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I tried to tell myself it was just my nerves, the excitement of moving into a new place playing tricks on me. After all, this was meant to be a fresh start. But as I would soon realize, in this house, nothing was ever quite as it seemed. I had bought the place on a whim, really. After my divorce, I needed a change of scenery, a new beginning. When I came across the listing for the old Victorian on the edge of town, it felt perfect. Sure, it needed work, but that was part of the charm. A project to occupy my hands and mind. The realtor had been unusually eager to close the deal, practically thrusting the keys into my hand the moment the paperwork was signed. I should have taken it as a warning, but I was too caught up in the excitement of starting over. That first night, I barely slept. The house groaned and creaked, settling into itself like a living organism. But there was more to it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking my every movement. During the day, I tried to dismiss it. Old houses had character, I reassured myself. That's why I bought it, after all. I threw myself into cleaning and repairs, determined to make the place feel like mine. It was while I was stripping wallpaper in the upstairs hallway that I first encountered something strange. Behind a particularly stubborn patch of paper, I uncovered a small door, no larger than a shoebox. It was locked, the keyhole rusted and old. My curiosity got the better of me. I spent nearly an hour trying different keys I'd found around the house, but none fit. Finally, feeling frustrated, I decided to pry it open. The wood splintered easily under the force, revealing a small, dark space beyond. As I reached in, my fingers brushed against something soft. I pulled it out, my heart racing with anticipation. It was a doll, old and tattered, its porcelain face cracked and one eye missing. But it was the expression on its face that sent an icy chill down my spine. A twisted grimace that looked more like a silent scream than a smile. I should have thrown it away right then, but something kept me from doing it. Instead, I placed it on a shelf in my bedroom, convincing myself it was just a relic of the house's past. That night, the dreams began. I found myself wandering the halls of the house, but something was wrong. The proportions were distorted. Doorways were too tall and narrow, staircases twisted at impossible angles. And everywhere I looked, there were dolls, hundreds of them, each with cracked faces and wearing that same dreadful expression. I woke up in a cold sweat, the sickly sweet smell even stronger now. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The doll I'd found was no longer on the shelf. It sat at the foot of my bed, its one remaining eye fixed on me. I told myself I must have moved it in my sleep, that the dream had confused my memories. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. Objects would move when I wasn't looking. I'd hear footsteps in empty rooms, childlike laughter echoing through the halls. And always, that sickly sweet smell grew stronger. I tried to ignore it, to rationalize it away. I was just stressed, I told myself. The isolation of living alone in a big old house was getting to me. But I couldn't ignore the way the air seemed to thicken when I entered certain rooms, or the shadows that moved in ways shadows shouldn't. It was the discovery in the attic that finally forced me to confront the truth. I'd been avoiding the attic, telling myself it was just because I hadn't gotten around to cleaning it yet. But one night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn there. The pull was undeniable, like a siren's call. The attic door opened with a creak that seemed to echo through the entire house. As I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight, I was hit by a wave of that sweet smell, so strong it made me gag. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw them, dolls. Hundreds of them, maybe 1,000, covering every surface. They hung from the rafters, sat in neat rows on shelves, spilled out of old trunks and boxes. And every single one had that same twisted expression, that silent scream. But it was the far corner of the attic that drew my attention. There, partially hidden behind a stack of old furniture, was a door. A door that, according to the house's layout, shouldn't exist. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run from this house and never look back. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. The door swung open easily, revealing a small, dark room beyond. And there, in the center of the room, was a rocking chair. It moved slowly back and forth, creaking softly, though there was no breeze to move it. As I stepped closer, my flashlight illuminated the figure in the chair. It was a doll larger than the others, almost the size of a child. But this doll was different. Its face wasn't frozen in that horrific grimace. Instead, it smiled, a wide, knowing smile that seemed to stretch even wider as I watched. And then, it opened its eyes. I don't remember much after that. I have flashes, running down the stairs, the sound of childlike laughter echoing all around me, the sensation of tiny hands tugging at my clothes. Somehow, I made it out of the house, my car screeching out of the driveway as the laughter faded into the distance. I drove through the night, not stopping until I had crossed 3 states. I left everything behind. My clothes, my belongings, the dreams of a new beginning. None of it mattered. I just had to escape. It's been years now, and I've never gone back. I've tried to move on, to bury the memory of that house and what I encountered there. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I catch a whiff of that sickly sweet smell. And in my dreams, I still see that doll sitting in the rocking chair, its eyes opening to reveal the darkness lurking inside. I know now that some houses are never truly empty. They have histories, secrets that cling to the walls and seep into the very bones of the structure. And sometimes those secrets are better left undisturbed. I often wonder about the family that moved in after me. Did they experience the same things? Did they uncover the truth hidden in the attic? Or did the house remain silent, biding its time until it found its next victim? I'll never know for certain. But one thing I do know, I'll never buy an old house again. Some fresh starts come at too high a price, and some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. As for the doll, well, I try not to think about it. But sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I swear I see a small porcelain face staring at me, waiting. And I wonder if maybe, just maybe, I didn't leave everything behind after all. Maybe a piece of that house followed me, ensuring that I would never truly escape the horrors I uncovered. So, if you're ever house hunting and you come across a charming old Victorian that seems too perfect to be true, take my advice. Walk away. Some deals aren't worth the price. And some houses are hungry for more than just your money. They want your soul, and they're patient enough to wait until you willingly give it to them. The attic door groaned as it opened, a cloud of dust swirling in the beam of sunlight streaming through the window. I coughed, swatting at the particles in the air, and squinted into the dim space. Amid the usual jumble of forgotten items and inherited treasures, a worn leather-bound book caught my attention. Its spine was bent, and the pages had taken on a yellowish tint with age. When I picked it up, a sudden chill ran down my spine. Little did I know, I was about to stumble upon a family secret that would shatter everything I thought I knew. I'm Emily, and I've always been the curious sort. After my grandmother passed and left me her old Victorian house, I saw it as a chance to uncover my family's past. This house had been passed down for generations, from mother to daughter, and was filled with memories and untold stories. The attic was the last place I hadn't explored yet. I had been avoiding it. Part of it was due to the dust. I'm mildly allergic, and part of it was the unsettling atmosphere that attics in old houses always seem to have. But in the end, my curiosity got the better of me. The book I discovered was a journal, its leather cover still soft despite its age. The first page, written in faded ink, bore my great-great-grandmother's name, Elizabeth Blackwood. I sat down on an old trunk, brushing away cobwebs, and began to read. Initially, it seemed like a typical diary entry for a woman of the late 1800s. Elizabeth wrote about her daily life, her husband, and her children. But as I flipped through the pages, the tone of her entries grew darker. The voices are growing louder. One entry said, "They whisper from the walls, from the floors. They know things, terrible things, and they want me to know them too." A shiver ran down my spine. Was this some kind of fictional writing, or had my great-great-grandmother been suffering from mental illness? As I continued reading, the entries became more specific, more unsettling. They spoke of today, of the truth behind the veil. This house, it isn't just a house. It's a gateway, and we are its guardians. My hands were shaking now, but I couldn't stop reading. Elizabeth wrote about rituals performed in the basement, about sacrifices made to keep the door closed. She described creatures that defied description, beings that existed beyond our reality, but pressed against the thin barrier between. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of joke, right? A work of fiction my great-great-grandmother had written to pass the time. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There had always been something off about this house. The way shadows seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. The whispers you'd hear late at night, too faint to make out words, but unmistakably there. I needed to know more. I spent the next few days poring over the journal, taking notes, trying to make sense of Elizabeth's ramblings. She wrote about a ritual that needed to be performed every full moon, about specific items needed, a silver knife, candles made from rendered fat. I didn't want to know what kind, and always blood. The house must be appeased, she wrote. A drop of blood from the keeper freely given. It's a small price to pay to keep the horrors at bay. I found myself standing in the basement that night, Elizabeth's journal in one hand, a silver letter opener in the other. The full moon shone through the small window, casting eerie shadows on the walls. This is crazy, I muttered to myself. You're not actually considering this, are you? But even as I said it, I knew I was. Because in the week since I'd found the journal, things had gotten worse. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent. I'd seen things moving in mirrors, only to vanish when I turned to look. And last night, I could have sworn I saw a door in my bedroom wall. A door that had never been there before and was gone in the morning. With a deep breath, I pricked my finger with the letter opener. A bead of blood welled up, bright red in the moonlight. I let it fall to the floor, half expecting something dramatic to happen. Nothing did, at least not at first. But as I stood there, heart pounding, I felt a change in the air. The oppressive feeling that had been building all week seemed to lift. The whispers faded to nothing. The house settled with a sigh, like a great beast appeased. I sank to the floor, my legs suddenly weak. What have I done? I whispered, but I knew exactly what I'd done. I'd taken up the mantle of keeper, just as my grandmother had, and her mother before her, all the way back to Elizabeth. I'd acknowledged the terrible truth, that this house was more than just a building, that it held back horrors beyond imagination, and that it was now my responsibility to keep those horrors contained. Over the next few months, I delved deeper into Elizabeth's journal, learning the intricacies of being a keeper. I performed the ritual every full moon, watching as my blood sank into the basement floor, consumed by something I couldn't see but could definitely feel. I learned to listen to the house, to feel its moods. I learned to recognize the signs of when the barrier was weakening, the increase in whispers, the shadows that moved too quickly, the impossible geometries that would appear and disappear in the corners of rooms. And I learned about the consequences of failure. Elizabeth wrote about a time before she understood her role, when she'd left the house for months. She returned to find the town in chaos. People gone mad from glimpsing things they were never meant to see. It had taken all her strength and the sacrifice of something far more precious than blood to close the rift she'd allowed to open. Couldn't let it go on. I was the guardian now, and it was my responsibility to protect what lay within. But it wasn't easy. The things I witnessed, the knowledge I carried, it all burdened me. Relationships became impossible. How could I connect with anyone when I couldn't share the truth? I couldn't leave the house for long stretches of time, not without risking another disaster. My existence became intertwined with the house, and the house became my existence. Years passed, and from my windows, I watched as the world outside changed, as technology evolved, and society moved forward. But inside these walls, it felt as though time had frozen. I followed the rituals. I kept the darkness at bay, and I aged. Now, as I write this, I am an elderly woman. My hair has turned silver. My hands tremble as I grip the pen. I have no children to pass this responsibility to, no daughter to inherit the role of keeper. I'm filled with fear about what will happen once I'm gone. Will the house find a new guardian? Or will the horrors finally break free, spilling into a world unprepared for them? I've done what I can to prepare. I've written a journal, more detailed than Elizabeth's, documenting everything I've learned. I've set up a trust to ensure the house will always be maintained and occupied. But deep down, I know it might not be enough. The house is patient, but it is also insatiable. One day, it might decide the small offerings we've given it are no longer sufficient. So if you're reading this, if you've found yourself in possession of a house that feels unervingly alive, take heed. Listen to the whispers. Watch the shadows. And if you come across a door where no door should be, think very carefully before you open it. Because once some doors are opened, they can never truly be shut again. This happened to me on Thursday, April 25th, and I still can't shake the feeling of how terrifying and strange it was. I was home alone, getting ready for my 12 o'clock college class that morning. I opened my blinds to let in some natural light, and as I glanced outside, I saw a man in his mid-30s, wearing a baseball cap, roaming around my property. He had his hands on his hips and walked with a lot of confidence. Our yard is situated on a cliff, overlooking our 5-acre property, and I live in the scenic Pacific Northwest. I was confused at first, thinking maybe he was a worker my mom had hired for house renovations, just taking in the view. I felt a little uncomfortable at this point because he walked to the side of my house and was out of sight. I decided to go upstairs to get a better look, and I saw him again, this time roaming around my front yard and driveway, inspecting things and checking out the house. He still hadn't noticed me. I called my dad and asked if we had hired anyone to come by, and he said he didn't know of anyone and would call my mom to check, then call me back. While I was waiting for the call, I noticed the strange guy's car parked nearby. A white Honda with no license plates, just parked parallel to my front door. He was still wandering around, not noticing me. That's when I remembered we had a security system, so I armed it just in case. If he tried to break in, the police would be alerted immediately. If he was a professional or a worker, he would have rung the doorbell or knocked at least once. But he didn't do either. Just then, I got a call back from my dad. He confirmed that neither he nor my mom had hired anyone to come by, and he told me to call our local police station right away. I went downstairs, double-checking that all the doors and windows upstairs were locked, then called the police. I explained the situation to a woman on the other end, but instead of sending an officer out, she gave me a number for their emergency dispatch line and told me to speak with them. I call the number she gave me, and immediately I get an automated message saying thank you for calling my town's name, not emergency hotline. Nobody is available to take your call right now. If this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911. At this point, I'm really irritated because 15 minutes has passed and this weird dude is just lurking around my house while I'm home alone. And apparently that wasn't enough to warrant an emergency to the lady. I called at my local police department. I hung up and decided to call 911. After getting in touch with the 911 operator, I was asked a series of questions about his appearance before they could even alert officers near me to start heading toward my house. The whole thing seemed really weird. Nobody was in a hurry to have officers come up to my place when I was a younger girl home alone with a strange dude. I asked the lady if I could stay on the line with her when she finally, after what seemed like forever, alerted police to come to where I was. She agreed, and I went back upstairs to check on the weird guy, and he's now sitting in his unplated Honda, either listening to a radio show extremely loudly or on a phone with someone through his car. It was a very prominent, loud male voice coming from his car. Then all of a sudden I hear the tone you hear when someone hangs up on you and the operator was no longer on the line. I was really confused when my thoughts were interrupted by an unrecognized phone number calling me. I assumed it was the operator calling me back, so I picked it up. Instead, I was greeted by a really creepy heavy breathing. I'm not sure who it was, but it freaked me out. I hung up immediately and dialed back 911. I've been pretty calm up to this point, but that phone call put me in panic mode. I got on the phone with another operator who already knew my situation and address before I could even explain it to her. She said the cops were on her way. 20 minutes had passed at this point. The dude is still here in his car and the cops aren't. Keep in mind, I live in a rather smaller town, so there is no reason why it took the cops as long as it did to come down. Finally, this dude is leaving my driveway right as the cops pull in, and they stop him and ask him a few questions. A cop then comes to my door and hands me a sketchy-looking flyer saying it was just a landscaper. He said he had an appointment. I was really relieved and irritated that it was just a dude my mom had hired until I realized it wasn't. I called my mom back and said the cop said it was just a landscaper that you hired and that he had an appointment. My mom replies with, "I can assure you that we never hired a landscaper. We don't even need one. The screech of metal grinding against metal was the first sign that our road trip was about to take a terrifying turn. I glanced at Jenny, my fiancée, as she struggled with the steering wheel, trying to steer our sputtering car toward the shoulder of the desolate highway. We finally rolled to a stop just as the last slivers of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty, barren landscape. Little did we know, the encroaching night would soon be the least of our concerns. What was that? I asked, my voice tight. I peered out the window at the empty road that stretched endlessly in both directions. Jenny shook her head, frustration clear on her face. I don't know, Mark. It just died. She turned the key in the ignition, but the engine only made a weak wheezing sound in response. I pulled out my phone, already expecting the worst. No signal. We were stranded in the middle of nowhere, having taken a scenic detour on our way to visit Jenny's parents. It had seemed so romantic at the time, just the two of us on the open road. Now, with darkness closing in and our car dead, it felt like the opening scene of every horror movie I'd ever watched. All right, don't panic, I said, trying to sound more composed than I felt. There's got to be a town nearby. We passed a sign a while ago. Remember? Jenny nodded, her blonde hair catching the last rays of twilight. Yeah, Millbrook. It can't be far. We grabbed our jackets and a flashlight from the glove compartment before setting off. The cool evening air smelled faintly of dust and rain that had yet to fall. Our footsteps crunched on the gravel shoulder, the sound unnervingly loud in the dead silence. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting headlights to appear. But the road remained empty, a black strip cutting through the growing darkness. By the time we spotted lights in the distance, it was fully dark. A sense of relief flooded me, quickly followed by a nagging unease. There was something strange about the town's silhouette. The buildings seemed to sag at odd angles, their proportions slightly off. Thank God, Jenny sighed, quickening her pace. Maybe we can find a mechanic, or at least a phone. As we entered the town limits, my unease grew even stronger. The streets were eerily empty. No cars parked along the curbs, no people in sight. Yet every window glowed with warm, inviting light. It felt unsettling, like we'd walked onto the set of a deserted movie scene. We made our way down what appeared to be the main street, our eyes scanning each building. There was a diner with a faintly buzzing open sign. A small grocery store with dusty shelves visible through its windows. A gas station pump stood like a silent sentinel. Hello, Jenny called, her voice bouncing off the vacant buildings. Is anyone here? We need help. No response, just that unnerving silence. Let's try the diner, I suggested, pointing to its cheery facade. There's got to be someone in there. As we approached, I could see movement inside, shadows passing behind the windows, the vague outlines of people seated at booths. Hope surged within me. Finally, some signs of life. But when I pulled on the door, it didn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, but it was like trying to move a solid wall. Through the glass, I could still see people inside, going about their business as if we weren't there at all. What the hell? I muttered, peering through the window. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The people inside. They weren't quite right. Their movements were jerky, almost mechanical, and their faces I couldn't make out any features. It was as if they had smooth blank ovals where faces should be. I stumbled back, grabbing Jenny's arm. We need to go now. What? Why? What did you see? She tried to look for herself, but I pulled her away. Trust me, we don't want to be here, I said, my voice shaking. This place, it's wrong. As if in response to my words, the town seemed to come alive around us. Not in a good way. The buildings began to shift and warp, their angles becoming even more impossible. The street lights flickered, casting wild shadows that moved independently of anything around them. And then we saw them. People, if you could call them that, began emerging from the buildings. They moved with that same jerky gait I'd seen in the diner. Their featureless faces turned towards us. They didn't speak, didn't make any sound at all, but their intent was clear. They were coming for us. We ran back the way we came towards the edge of town in our broken-down car beyond. The entities followed, their footsteps a discordant rhythm behind us. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. As we reached the town limits, I felt a shift in the air, a pressure, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The town was folding in on itself. Buildings twisted and merged, streets rippled like water, and the entities pursuing us were changing too, their forms blurring and stretching in ways that defied physics and sanity alike. We kept running, our lungs burning, legs aching. The highway stretched out before us, our car a distant silhouette in the moonlight. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by a low, ominous that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Just as we reached the car, the world blinked. There's no other way to describe it. One moment, we were running for our lives from an impossible nightmare town. The next, we were standing next to our car on an ordinary stretch of highway. The first light of dawn breaking on the horizon. We stood there, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what had happened. The town was gone. No lights in the distance. No sign it had ever existed at all. Did that really happen? Jenny asked, her voice small and shaky. I didn't respond. Couldn't. Instead, I tried the car door, half expecting it to be locked, but it opened with ease. The key was still in the ignition, exactly where we had left it. With shaking hands, I turned it. The engine roared to life as though nothing had ever been wrong. We drove on in silence, both of us too rattled to speak. As the first light of dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I began to question if it had all been some sort of shared hallucination. Perhaps we'd both fallen asleep in the car and experienced the same nightmare. But then Jenny reached over and took my hand. "Your knuckles," she said quietly. I looked down. My knuckles were raw and scraped, as if I had been pounding on something, on a door that wouldn't open. We drove straight through to Jenny's parents' house, not stopping once along the way. We never discussed that night, not in any real way. How could we explain it even to ourselves? But sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of that low, endless ringing still in my ears. And I wonder, what if we hadn't gotten out? What if, somewhere in that strange, impossible town, there are two more beings wandering its silent streets, their faces smooth and empty, trapped in an endless surreal nightmare. I don't take unfamiliar roads anymore. I stick to the main highways, the well-worn paths. And if I ever see a small town suddenly appear in the distance as night falls, I won't stop. No matter how inviting the lights may seem, no matter how badly I may need help. Because some places, once you enter, you may never truly leave. So if you're ever driving late at night, and you find yourself on a deserted stretch of road as darkness closes in, be cautious. Watch the horizon. And if you spot lights appearing where no town should be, don't stop. Don't even slow down. Just keep driving and hope that whatever lurks behind those lights doesn't decide to follow you home. The first thing that hit me when I arrived in Everdale was the silence. As I ventured deeper into the valley, the usual sounds of the wilderness, birdsong, the rustling of leaves, the scurrying of small animals, faded into an unsettling quiet that seemed to press against my eardrums. I should have turned back then, should have recognized how wrong everything felt. But my curiosity, that damnable impulse that had gotten me into more trouble than I cared to admit, pushed me onward. Little did I know, I was walking straight into a trap that had been centuries in the making. My name's Jake, and I'm an urban explorer, but with a twist. I don't just seek out abandoned buildings or forgotten tunnels. I search for lost communities, ghost towns, failed utopias, places erased from existence by disaster or simply by the ravages of time. That passion led me to the rumors of Everdale. The story went that in the late 1800s, A group of settlers established a community deep in the mountains, completely isolated from the outside world. They managed to thrive for a while, but by the early 1900s, all contact with the outside world stopped. Expeditions sent to investigate came back empty-handed. No buildings, no remains, not even a rusty nail to suggest that humans had ever inhabited the place. It was exactly the kind of mystery that set my heart racing. I spent months researching, digging through old newspapers, land records, and local legends to piece together whatever scraps of information I could find. Eventually, I thought I'd track down the location of the lost settlement. The hike was grueling, the terrain was rough, and the trail often vanished entirely, forcing me to rely on my map and compass. But when I finally crested a final ridge and looked down into the valley below, a surge of triumph hit me. There, nestled among the trees, I could make out unmistakable signs of human habitation. Buildings, fields, even what appeared to be a church spire rising above the treetops. My excitement was short-lived, however. As I descended into the valley, that same unnatural silence descended upon me, accompanied by a growing sense of dread that I couldn't shake. The air felt thick, almost like syrup, and the colors around me seemed muted, as though I were looking through a faded photograph. But still, I pressed on. I had come too far to turn back now. As I reached the outskirts of the town, the wrongness only deepened. The buildings looked off. Their proportions were subtly distorted. Angles that should have been straight were unnervingly curved. It was as though the entire town had been constructed by someone who only had a vague understanding of what buildings were supposed to look like. Then I saw them, the people. The first one appeared as I passed what seemed to be a general store. A man, dressed in clothes that could have been from the 19th century, was sweeping the porch. His movements were strangely fluid, unnaturally smooth. As I approached, he turned to look at me, and I had to fight the urge to gasp. His face was wrong. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but they seemed to shift and blur, never quite settling into a fixed arrangement. It was like trying to focus on a face underwater, constantly distorted by ripples and waves. "Welcome, traveler," he said, his voice oddly melodious. "We've been expecting you." A chill ran down my spine. How could they have been expecting me? I hadn't told anyone about my expedition. "I'm just passing through." I managed to stammer out. "I didn't mean to intrude." The man's face rippled into what might have been a smile. "Nonsense. You're right where you're meant to be. Come, the others will want to meet you." Before I could protest, more people began to emerge from the buildings around us. Men, women, children, all dressed in antiquated clothing, all moving with that same unnatural grace, all with those shifting, blurring faces. They surrounded me, their not quite voices rising in a cacophony of greetings and exclamations. I felt dizzy, overwhelmed by their presence and the wrongness of it all. "Please," I said, trying to back away. "I should go. I have to get back." A woman's voice cut through the noise. The crowd parted, revealing a figure that made my blood run cold. She was tall, impossibly so, her head nearly brushing the roof of the nearby porch. Her face was the most defined I'd seen yet, but it was a face that belonged in nightmares, too angular, too symmetrical, with eyes that seemed to glow from within. "There is no back, dear Jake," she said, my name rolling off her tongue like she'd known it all along. "You're home now." I ran. I don't remember making the conscious decision to do so, but suddenly, I was sprinting down the town's main street, my heart pounding in my ears. The buildings blurred as I passed, seeming to twist and reach for me with impossible angles. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing, their footsteps a terrible rhythm that seemed to shake the very ground. I dared not look back, afraid of what I might see. I reached the edge of town, expecting to see the forest I'd walked through earlier. Instead, I found myself facing a shimmering, translucent barrier. Beyond it, I could see the trees, the mountains, the world I knew, but it was like looking through warped glass, everything distorted and strange. I pressed my hands against the barrier, desperately seeking a way through. It felt solid, yet yielding, like pushing against a membrane. With a surge of effort, I managed to force my way through, the barrier stretching and then snapping back behind me like a rubber band. I didn't stop running until I reached my campsite, my lungs burning, legs shaking with exhaustion. Only then did I dare to look back. The valley was empty. No town, no fields, no church spire reaching towards the sky. Just wilderness, untouched and serene. I packed up my gear with shaking hands and hiked out, not stopping until I reached my car. As I drove away, I tried to convince myself it had all been some sort of hallucination. Maybe I'd eaten some bad trail mix, or the altitude had gotten to me. But deep down, I knew the truth. What I'd witnessed in that valley was real, as impossible as it seemed. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into research, desperately trying to make sense of what I had experienced. I found more stories, accounts from other explorers who had encountered Everdale over the years. Some had fled just as I had. Others hadn't been so fortunate. I uncovered the town's origins. It hadn't been founded by ordinary settlers, but by a group practicing a strange, esoteric form of magic. They had sought to create a place outside of time itself, a sanctuary where they could live forever, untouched by change. And in a twisted way, they had succeeded. But their magic had warped them, trapping them in a half-life of endless repetition. The people I had seen weren't the original settlers, but something else, perhaps echoes or manifestations of the town's distorted consciousness. I learned that Everdale doesn't exist in a fixed location. It moves, appearing in different wilderness areas across the country, always isolated, always waiting for unsuspecting travelers to stumble upon it. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of that shimmering barrier. In my dreams, I never make it through. Instead, I'm pulled back into the town, surrounded by those shifting faces, those fluid figures. The tall woman smiles at me, greeting me as though I'm coming home. I wake from these dreams in a cold sweat, heart pounding. And for a brief moment, just a fleeting second, I see my own face in the mirror, warping and shifting like theirs. I don't go hiking anymore. I've abandoned my urban exploration, my search for forgotten places. Some things I've learned are better left undiscovered. Some communities vanish for a reason. But even so, I can't help but wonder about Everdale. Is it still out there, waiting for its next victim? Are the people I saw still going through their endless routines, trapped in a moment that stretches into eternity? And sometimes, when the wind is right and the world falls silent, I swear I can hear them calling to me, beckoning me home. So, if you ever find yourself hiking in the wilderness and come across a town that's not on any map, a place that seems too perfect, too preserved, run. Just run. And don't look back. Because Everdale is always waiting, always hungry for new residents. And once it welcomes you home, you may never leave. The tow truck's headlights sliced through the darkness, a beacon of hope on the desolate highway. I let out a breath of relief, finally feeling like help had arrived. But as the vehicle drew closer, an overwhelming sense of dread began to settle in my stomach. The driver's silhouette looked unnaturally distorted, too tall and angular to be human. When he stepped out of the cab, his movements were unervingly smooth, as if he was gliding rather than walking. A creeping horror washed over me, and I realized with a growing sense of panic that my savior might just be my undoing. I'm Alex, and until that night, I never believed in anything supernatural. I was a rational person, an accountant by trade who worked with cold, hard numbers. But sometimes, the universe has a way of completely shattering our perception of reality in the most terrifying ways imaginable. It had started as a routine drive. I was coming back from a late meeting with a client, taking the scenic route home along a stretch of highway that passed through thick forest. The moon hung full in the sky, casting an eerie, almost otherworldly glow on the landscape. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, though there was something unsettling about the stillness of it all. That's when my car started to act up. The engine sputtered, the lights flickered, and within moments, I was coasting to a stop on the shoulder of the road. I tried restarting the car, but nothing happened. No lights, no radio, just silence. I pulled out my phone and cursed under my breath when I saw there was no signal. Of course, I was miles from anywhere, stuck on a deserted stretch of highway with a broken-down car and no way to reach anyone for help. For a while, I just sat there, hoping that someone might drive by. But as the minutes dragged on, the silence of the forest began to feel suffocating. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Every rustle in the leaves, every snap of a twig, sent my heart into overdrive. I was just about to give up and start walking when I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. The flood of relief I felt was almost dizzying. Help had arrived. But as the tow truck got closer, that relief quickly turned to unease. Something wasn't right. The proportions of the truck seemed off, the rumble of the engine too deep, too rhythmic, almost like it was breathing. When it finally pulled up behind me, I hurried out of the car, waving gratefully. But the moment I got a good look at the driver, my blood went cold. He was impossibly tall, his head brushing the top of the truck's cab as he unfolded himself from the seat. His limbs were unnaturally long, his joints bending in ways that defied the limits of human anatomy. And his face, it was like staring at a photograph that was out of focus, features that shifted and blurred whenever I tried to focus on them. "A car trouble?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I nodded, unable to speak. Every instinct was screaming at me to run. But where could I go? We were surrounded by miles of dark forest, and my car was dead. The driver, if you could call him that, moved toward my car with that unsettling fluid grace. He bent over the engine, his impossibly long fingers probing the machinery in ways that made no mechanical sense. "Looks like your soul, your battery is dead," he said, turning those shifting blurry features toward me. Was he smiling? I couldn't tell, and I didn't want to look too closely to find out. "I can give you a tow," he continued. "Take you somewhere. Safe." The way he said safe sent shivers down my spine. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that if I got into that truck, I would never be seen again. At least not in this world. "No, thank you," I stammered. "I think I'll just wait for another car." His head tilted at an angle that should have snapped a human neck. "Another car? Oh, I'm afraid that won't do. You see, this road, it doesn't exist anymore. Not in your world anyway." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean, my world?" He made a sound that might have been a laugh, but it was all wrong. Too high, too sharp, like glass breaking. "You took a wrong turn a few miles back. Didn't you notice how the moonlight changed? How the trees grew closer to the road? You're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy." As he spoke, I became aware of subtle changes in my surroundings. The moonlight did seem different, tinged with colors that had no names. The trees were definitely closer, their branches now intertwining over the road, forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. "This can't be real," I muttered, more to myself than to him. "I must have fallen asleep at the wheel. This is a dream." The driver shook his head, the motion too smooth, too controlled. "Oh, it's very real, and you have a choice to make. Come with me and I'll take you somewhere interesting, or stay here and become part of the forest. Either way, your old life is over." As if to emphasize his point, I heard movement in the woods around us. Shapes darted between the trees, things that slithered and crawled, that flew on impossible wings. Eyes gleamed in the darkness, too many eyes, watching with hungry anticipation. I looked back at the driver, at his blurred features and too long limbs. He wasn't human, that much was clear. But was he a devil or an angel? A tormentor or a twisted kind of savior? In that moment, I realized that it didn't matter. Whatever he was, whatever this place was, it was beyond my comprehension, and my only chance of survival, if survival was even possible and was to play along. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll go with you." His face rippled in what might have been satisfaction. "A wise choice. Get in." As I approached the truck, I noticed that it too had changed. The metal seemed to pulse and shift, more organic than mechanical. The cab door opened on its own, revealing an interior that was larger than it should have been, filled with shadows that moved of their own accord. I climbed in, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The driver folded himself into the seat beside me, his elongated form somehow fitting perfectly in the impossible space. "Where are we going?" I asked as the truck began to move, the engine's rumble now unmistakably alive. "Oh, everywhere and nowhere," he replied cryptically. "Time and space work differently where we're headed. You might see wonders beyond imagination, or horrors that will shatter your sanity, or both." It's always a surprise. As we drove, the world outside the windows began to shift. The forest vanished, replaced by landscapes that defied any attempt at description. Cities made of light and shadow, oceans of liquid fire, mountains that floated in the air. Creatures I had no words for moved through these impossible realms. Some were beautiful, some were terrifying, but all were utterly alien. I lost all sense of time. It could have been hours or years that we passed through that kaleidoscope of realities. Throughout it all, the driver remained silent, his blurred features focused on a road I couldn't see. Finally, after what could have been an eternity or just a moment, the truck came to a stop. We were in a place that seemed almost normal, a city street at night, but there was a subtle wrongness to it that set my teeth on edge. The streetlights flickered with colors that shouldn't exist, and the few people I could see moved in ways that weren't quite human. "This is your stop," the driver said. "Welcome to your new home." As I stepped out of the truck on shaky legs, I turned to ask him one last question, but he was gone, the truck with him, and I was left standing alone in this almost familiar, yet utterly alien world. I've been here for what feels like a lifetime, though time doesn't work the same here. I've learned to navigate this strange city, to communicate with its inhabitants, and to survive in a reality that is always shifting. Sometimes I see others who've arrived, lost souls like myself, people who took a wrong turn, who wandered into places they should never have been. I try to help them when I can, to ease their transition into this strange existence. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the rumble of an engine that sounds almost like breathing. I see headlights in the distance, cutting through more than just darkness. And I wonder, was I rescued that night, or was I taken? I may never know the answer, but I do know this. If you're ever driving down a lonely road at night and your car breaks down, and a tow truck approaches, think carefully before you accept that ride, because some journeys, once begun, can never be undone. And somewhere, out there, on a highway that exists in the cracks between realities, a driver with a blurred face and impossibly long limbs is always waiting, ready to take another lost soul on the ride of their life or afterlife. A few months ago, I started taking the breakfast shift, which means I'm often the only person working in the department for at least an hour. There's no one around to explain or dismiss what I'm going through, and the only way into the rest of the hospital is through a door I lock behind me. The person who relieves me in the morning opens it when they arrive. Aside from the typical strange noises, warped perception of time, and occasional oddities, like objects moving across the kitchen or vanishing only to reappear somewhere else, there's one thing that almost always happens when I work. To explain it, I need to give a little context. The door from the outside leads straight into a locker room, and within that locker room is another door that opens to a storage area. The storage room only has one key, which will be important in a moment. Every morning, I use this key to open the storage room, but the key gets stuck in the lock. This never happened during my training, when I unlocked the door with a coworker by my side. Once the key jams, the lockers on the other side start rattling, and I'm stuck wrestling with the key for a while before it eventually gives. This happens every single morning without fail. But this morning, something different happened. When one of my coworkers arrived and tried to enter the storage room, it was locked. The door doesn't lock from the inside, and I still had the key from when I unlocked it 2 hours earlier. When I unlocked the door again, it didn't get stuck. I can only guess that it was because I wasn't alone. Something else strange happened this morning as well. I had to bake some frozen scones that were stuck together. I used my key to tap them on the table, trying to separate them. The rhythmic tapping echoed through the kitchen in a very distinct pattern. I turned to put the box back in the freezer, and that's when the steel door, which had been wide open before, slammed shut behind me. It was tough to get the door open again, but I figured it was probably just a result of me not being fully awake. It was only 4:30 in the morning. Once I finally got out, the exact same rhythmic banging sound I had been making with the scones seemed to be coming from the other side of the kitchen, about 70 feet away. I called out, thinking the bread delivery had arrived early, and walked over to check, but no one was there. I'm not the only one who's experienced these things. Before I started working alone on this shift, a longtime coworker, who's very religious and has been here for over 30 years, warned me about the strange things that happen. Taking his experiences into account, I can't shake the feeling that something may be messing with me. My encounters have been more noticeable and confrontational lately. Am I just being paranoid, or should I be concerned? I was born, baptized, and raised in the typical evangelical lifestyle common in my area. The church I attended labeled themselves as non-denominational Christians, which, in their view, set them apart from other Christian denominations. A lot of what this church was really about, I only started to understand after growing up with a skeptical mindset. Thankfully, I was always someone who questioned things, and God was definitely one of them. My dad always emphasized that the most important thing was my personal relationship with God and encouraged me to take what I heard and apply it in my own way. My childhood was mostly innocent until I turned 10, and that's when I first encountered my friend's church before transitioning to my home church. Her church, on the extreme side of the evangelical spectrum, had Sunday school classes that were often more like rock concerts than traditional worship. Sometimes the worship was more lyrical, with the kids dancing to the music. I wasn't a fan of either. The rock concerts were way too loud for me, and the dancing didn't make me feel closer to God. It just felt silly, and honestly, I didn't enjoy it. One of the big messages we were taught was that we had to obey our parents, or God would be disappointed in us. We were told that we had to do everything our parents wanted, even if it didn't feel right. From a young age, I was taught that if I didn't follow these rules, something bad would happen to me. And if I made mistakes, I was a sinner and weak in God's eyes. My faith and my strength was truly tested when I was 9. That's when my mother had a mental breakdown, kidnapped me, and showed me what it meant to be homeless and caught in addiction. She never directly showed me the drugs, but I knew she was using them. A year later, when my dad found me, the people in his church celebrated and welcomed me back with open arms. This church had saved my dad after the divorce, and he believed rescuing me from my mom was an example of the church's loyalty to God. According to him, it wasn't the police who found me, it was God who brought me back. With all of this, I grew up skeptical about organized religion. As a teenager, I asked a lot of tough questions about God's intentions. One of the hardest was why God gave my mother mental illness. The congregation told me to pray about it, saying that sometimes God gives people tough situations to see if they can handle spreading his word. My dad told me I couldn't read Harry Potter because the spells in it were real. Yes, that was actually said, and it caused me to miss out on a big part of growing up in the 2000s. I can't enjoy the series now, and it still makes me sad. I did read the first 4 books anyway, but when I got caught, I was told to never read them again because it was a sin. Speaking of sin, do you remember purity rings? Well, purity culture was a very real thing too. If you want to prove your worth and commitment to God, then you must wear a purity ring and pledge not to have sex before marriage. I wore one until I lost my virginity pre-marriage. It felt so good to throw that thing into the lake. Purity culture was a way of showing girls to be submissive, committed, and would die for their husband by being pure for their wedding night. We were fed lies about birth control, condoms, and sex in general. We were told that what we learned in health class was a lie and to only listen to what they had to say. They told us that it would be painful if it was before marriage because God knows what the young woman is about to do. If the child of any parent in the inner circle disobeyed God in any way, they must repent to the pastor and be prayed over by the congregation in order to be saved. The inner circle is a group of individuals in the following rank: pastor, youth pastor, greeters, people who greet, mingle, and introduce newcomers to the church. Youth leaders, pastors' close friends, and Sunday school teachers. Everyone else are sheep. The ranks are unspoken, and throughout my teenage years, my parents were just on the cusp of being part of the inner circle. But since I was a rowdy teenager and sinned left and right, they were unable to be fully a part of it. I was fed lies that I was being a bad girl so that I would stop experiencing mental illnesses that I could not control. I used to self-harm because the pain felt good, but my parents told me I was just searching for attention. My eating disorder was said to be a demon possessing my body, and that's a story for another day. I want to warn you about the church because all 4 square churches are a part of this. They say they're non-denominational, but it's a cover for something more sinister. They brainwash their congregation into being perfect citizens or God will make their life miserable. If any of you believe that it's not true, God loves those who love him, and he is a loving, forgiving God. If you sin, he will forgive. He gets that we're human. He made us. If you believe in God, just remember that and I promise you'll be safe. For those of you who might be wondering, I am a very spiritual person. However, I take pieces from all religions and apply them to my life. I do not despise the evangelical church nor Christianity in general. I am simply writing this as a warning to stay away from these deceptive people because they don't even realize they are deceiving you. The part one feel is the scariest part of all. I've kept this story to myself for a long time, but over the past year, activity in my life has steadily increased, and I can't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. I started writing in my journal again, trying to make sense of things. When I was 12, my family and I moved into a new house. It was a custom-built home on 22 acres of land, surrounded by woods in southern Indiana. The house was beautiful, 3 bedrooms, a full basement, a wraparound porch, and a catwalk that connected the 2 upstairs rooms and overlooked the living room. My dad even had a pond dug out in the front yard, and the backyard was nothing but miles of dense woods. I was excited about moving in. After all, how could a brand new house possibly be haunted? But the experiences I had there were far worse than anything I'd encountered before. Some of these memories are unsettling to relive, but I think it's important to share them. Looking back, I should have trusted my instincts in the first week we moved in. I had a friend over, helping me unpack and get settled. We stayed up late into the night, putting my clothes away and hanging pictures on the walls. The windows didn't have curtains yet, and I remember avoiding looking back into the woods when it started to get dark because there was something unsettling about them. Eventually, my friend and I were happy with our progress and went to sleep. But when we woke up the next morning, I thought I was dreaming. Most of the clothes we had hung up were on the floor, and boxes that had been full when we fell asleep were now dumped over. The floor was covered in my belongings and trash. My parents didn't believe me, and my friend never came back to the house after that. At that moment, I wasn't scared. I was furious. It was my first week in a new home, and it was supposed to be a fresh start. I couldn't understand how or why this was happening again. The activity in this house only escalated from there. Throughout my early teenage years, I did everything I could to avoid being home, especially being alone. Lights would turn on and off by themselves. Doors would open and close on their own. Televisions would flicker on and off. Water faucets would turn on, and items would move around, only to reappear in a different place. Glasses would fall off counters and shatter. I'd hear whispers, see shadows. Eventually, my family started to question these strange occurrences, but they would just brush it off. There were several things present in that house, but the most consistent were the shadow figures. There were so many of them. The catwalk, stairs, and basement were the most common places where I'd see them. But I wasn't the only one. The catwalk between the 2 rooms was essentially a hallway without walls, and it was always a place where these figures seemed to linger. It connected the rooms, but looked down over the living room. The figures would just walk from my room to the other room back and forth. They were nearly a full apparition, but looked like a shadow. It was hard to explain. One night, I had a friend over and we were home alone watching movies. I ran to the kitchen to get a drink, and I could hear her screaming from the living room. I ran back in, and she was trembling in fear because she saw someone walk from the guest room into my room. I ran back in, and she was trembling in fear because she saw someone walk from the guest room into my room. I'd already seen this thing many times throughout the years do the same thing. I tried to explain what happens to my friend and even tried to get her to go upstairs with me to show her no one was really there. Needless to say, she ended up calling her parents and going home. On several occasions, I would be in my room watching TV with the door open and see the figure standing in the doorway of the guest bedroom. I would just shut and lock my door. This was my normal, but that doesn't mean it was any less terrifying. The shadow figures in the basement were worse. Our basement didn't have a door. It was just a staircase that went into the basement from the living room. Everything that we had in storage at the old guest house was down there. However, we also had a lot of World War I and II artifacts and memorabilia. My grandfather was a collector his entire life, and when he passed, our basement was the only space large enough to keep his life's work. We had medals, statues, guns, uniforms, flags, just to name a few. I 100% believe that multiple spirits were attached to these items because not only would you see shadow figures in the basement and creeping up the basement stairs, but you could hear whispers and things moving. It was truly a scene from a horror movie. Growing up, I didn't know land could be haunted. I laughed because looking back, I was living a real-life poltergeist movie. Living in the country, I played outside a lot. I often felt suffocated in the house and would just want to be able to breathe. However, I was never alone. I would often see a man standing by our pond. His face was never clear, but he would move around the pond. Sometimes he would be under our weeping willow tree, or sometimes he would be looking down at the house. He never moved, but instead just stood there. He didn't really scare me, but I never attempted to approach him. There was also something that would walk the porch. On many occasions, I would be sitting on the porch reading or talking with a friend, and you could hear someone walking. It was so clear that you would fully expect to see someone walk around the corner, but instead you would see the wood move with each footstep. You would see it get closer and closer by the movement of the wood and the sound, and then just stop. All of my friends and my mother witnessed this several times. It would always stop several feet in front of someone, and you could hear it walking around the porch from inside the house too. There were also the figures in the woods. I could look out a window and at any given point and see what I would consider to be a person standing in the woods peeking around a tree or bush. Their faces were never clear, and I couldn't ever determine whether they were men or women. Interestingly enough, I was playing in the woods one day and I stumbled across an old well. It was fairly deep, but you could tell it was extremely old because what was left was barely visible. I immediately told my parents about it and showed them where it was. I guess this piqued their interests and they began researching the land more. They were able to confirm that at one time a small community occupied the land, but nothing was left except for the well. The activity never stopped or even slowed down. Even when I wasn't home, I felt like I was being watched, and I still do. It impacted my family's emotional and mental states because the house was literally draining all of our energy and replacing it with negative energy. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. Everything in my life was strained because of home. I do think the house wore on my parents' relationship too, and in some crazy way, I partially blame their split on the house. In my later high school years, I started going to haunted locations with friends. For them, it was just for fun, and they didn't believe my stories or the ghost stories around town. They wanted proof, and I thought I could help. At this point in my life, I didn't think anything could be scarier than what I lived with at home. I really began to realize how sensitive I actually was. I also learned that spirits can physically hurt you and can attach themselves to you and follow you home to your already very haunted house. It was midnight in Cody, Wyoming. I had just finished a long day of work. As a medical courier, I spend a lot of time on the road, staying in various hotels, and my life is never boring. On this particular evening, I had just completed a 500-mile drive, finally arriving in Cody around midnight. The weather had been cold as it was December, and this is Wyoming after all. The roads that night were passable, not completely clear, but not treacherous either. It was one of those long, nerve-wracking drives where you stay alert the entire time. For 500 miles, I drove in the dark on nearly deserted roads, battling light snow and strong winds. It really takes a toll on you. That week had been especially busy. By the time I reached Wyoming, I had already been through 4 states. The drive to the patient's house was up a winding, slick road, but thankfully, the trip was uneventful. After dropping off the medicine, I called my boss to check in and let them know I had arrived and was heading to a hotel to get some rest. It was a pretty routine conversation, and we briefly discussed the reimbursement for the hotel room. They usually cover $80 to $100, which is a fair rate for a cheap hotel in Cody. At 31, a good night's sleep, a free breakfast, and a relaxing soak in the hot tub are must-haves when I find myself at a hotel. After putting in long hours and miles, I think I deserve to treat myself. Not only because it's been a profitable day, but also because I feel better after a proper rest, a great meal, and a good soak. I won't name the hotel chain I typically stay at, but it's one I frequent, especially since it offers the best value in my hometown back in Nebraska. That night, I pulled into the hotel I'd stayed at a few times before, so I was familiar with it. I had called ahead earlier in the day when I was leaving Denver to reserve my room and let them know I'd be arriving at midnight. I walked into the lobby, brushing the snow off my bag after it had fallen on me while I was getting my stuff out of the car. It was very quiet. No music, no TV playing in the lobby. I made my way to the counter, leaving a trail of wet shoe prints from the snow, the sound of my shoes squeaking on the floor. When I reached the counter, there was no one behind it. On the counter sat a bowl of ice cream with a brownie from the restaurant connected to the hotel. The local paper was open to the comics page, and the Sudoku puzzle was half filled out, with a pen left resting on the paper. Hanging on the back of the chair is a small lady's coat with fake fur fringe around the hood. On the floor next to the chair are a pair of smaller pink and black Nikes and a black purse. I figure that she, by the assumption of the coat, shoes, and purse, is in the bathroom. So I stand at the counter quietly waiting on her to return. I fiddle with my wallet, getting out my card to pay for it and my ID. I scroll through on my phone and hook up to their free Wi-Fi. 5 minutes go by and then 10. To 15 minutes, the phone starts ringing. I still had no idea where she was, and I had begun to get irritated. It had been a long day, and I wanted to get rested before I got up and drove home in the morning. After the phone stopped ringing and I started to get frustrated, I began to wander around the lobby and behind the counter shouting, "Hello? Is anyone here?" as loudly as possible. The area behind the counter is an employee-only area. I venture back behind the counter where a hallway leads to the back-of-house area connected to the offices, staff elevator, bathrooms, laundry, and the restaurant. I ventured down the hallway shouting hello. Still, no one answers. It is now 12:30 a.m. As I return to the counter and begin looking for a posted phone number for a manager or someone of authority, the phone rings. The cordless phone still laying next to the paper she had opened. Frustrated and exhausted, I answer the phone, hoping it's someone who could tell me where the woman is who is supposed to check me in. It's not. It's another guest who had tried calling earlier for a wake-up call in the morning. I explained to the gentleman on the phone my situation and how I cannot help him. He states he is coming to the lobby to help me look for the girl at the counter. I had not found a number to call. 5 minutes go by, and the strange older man with odd glasses and long unkempt hair comes into the lobby from the first floor hallway. At this point, I had been behind the counter and had been shouting to the point. I feared I may wake up other guests. I had wandered through the back area, the lobby, and the front part of the restaurant, all while shouting, and no one responded. This guy had given me the creeps, and I was exhausted but on high alert. There was an employee missing and a creepy guy who just happened to appear in the same time she is missing. Feeling nervous about this gentleman, I stay prepared for any strange behavior and keep myself at least arm's distance from him the entire time. I explain where I have looked, that I have yelled. At this point, I begin to go through what I call worst-case scenario preparation. This guy could have easily overpowered a small woman. I may be standing here with a crazy person. I keep my space and my back towards the main entry just in case. I am a grown man just under 6 feet. I have had self-defense courses, and I have a concealed carry weapon after encountering a bear at a patient's house in the fall. I have no reason to believe I am in immediate trouble, but this guy gives me the creeps. It is at this point I debate calling the cops. It's now 12:45 a.m. The gentleman tells me maybe she's in the bathroom, which I respond to that I had thought that myself. But I had walked by and yelled loudly when I walked through the back, and no one responded. He insists that we check the bathrooms. My red flag goes off, and I put another foot or two of space between us as I let him lead us down the hallway to the employee bathroom. My heart and mind are racing at this point. Did this guy kill her, and now he's going to try to kill me? I start to worry about my safety as we go down a hallway that leads to small rooms, and with one exit in and out. We reach the bathroom. He knocks and announces himself, and then opens the door. The bathroom is empty. We check a few more rooms and the elevator, but we find nothing. We venture back to the lobby where I stand behind the counter looking for any phone number that could be a manager or supervisor. About 10 minutes later, I finally got through to someone. It was now 12:55 a.m. The voice on the other end, groggy and half asleep, was the maintenance woman for the hotel. She seemed confused, not understanding who I was or why I was calling. I explained the situation as I noticed the creepy guy still standing on the other side of the counter, staring at me with an unnerving coldness. The maintenance woman said she'd be there in about 10 minutes. I hung up the phone, still confused, and walked around the counter. It was as if the woman had vanished, leaving her belongings behind. That's when I decided to check out the lobby and the seating area for the restaurant. I walked into the doorway, turned the corner, and down at the end of the booths, I saw a pair of legs hanging out from one. I had walked by that spot just moments before while checking around, and the creepy guy hadn't been there then. Seeing the legs hanging out like that made my stomach turn, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. Just then, the creepy guy walked up beside me. My instincts kicked in, and I quickly stepped away from him and moved down the row of booths into the darkened restaurant. With him at the far end, I looked into the booth where I saw the legs. There was a young woman, maybe 20 years old, looking very pretty, lying there. I bent down and gently shook her foot. She didn't respond. I shook again and called out, "Hey!" Still nothing. That's when the creepy guy started walking toward the booth, and I suddenly felt that I might need to defend myself. I kneeled down to reach my ankle holster as he approached quickly down the row of booths. But just as I was about to draw my weapon, the girl woke up and accidentally kicked me in the chest, knocking me gently onto my back and freezing the creepy guy in his tracks. Her sudden movement stopped both him and me, preventing me from drawing my weapon. She had been asleep the whole time, and the creepy guy was just a guest. Moments later, the maintenance woman arrived, and by 1:15 a.m., I was in my room, trying to decompress from the whole unsettling experience. To give a bit of context, we moved into a new house when I was 4. Less than a year after moving in, and just 4 days after his 31st birthday, my dad became violently ill and suddenly passed away. I'm 33 now, and over the years it's gotten a lot easier for me to talk about. So here it goes. Shortly after my dad passed, our family was at my grandma's, my mom's mom, for mourning and comfort. I was in the back playroom with my little brother and 2 cousins, one of whom was a few years older than me. Out of nowhere, in my mind, I heard an old rotary phone ringing that had been left around in an open box. I knew the call was for me, so I answered it, and it was my dad. He told me everything would be okay and said other comforting things. I hung up the phone feeling peaceful and happy. My older cousin witnessed this and swears to this day that he heard someone on the other end of the line. Not long after, I don't remember the exact timeline, I was with my aunt, my dad's sister. Since I was so young, she bought me a book to help explain death and heaven. After she read it, she tried to re-explain things to me, and I looked at her and said, "I know already." She responded with something like, "Oh, really?" And I told her, "Yes, because Daddy told me already." And that was that. Also, right after my dad passed, my mom woke up one morning, walked into the kitchen, and found all the upper and lower cabinets wide open. Startled her. There was also an incident where she was searching everywhere for an important document, something to do with her needing to take care of the bills now. She went through everything she could think of and then found the document sitting right on top of a pile of mail she had already gone through multiple times. Not in my mind, but she was sure it was my dad's doing. After that, I don't think anything else really involved my dad. I started to just get feelings about things, and it never felt like it was him anymore. All of this happened between 1991 and 2000. Some things occurred at my house and some at other places. I've done my best to put the events in a general chronological order. At my house, it all started with me hearing knocking on the ceiling above my head when I'd lay in bed at night. No matter where I positioned the bed, the knocking was always directly above my face. If the bed moved, the knocking would move with it. It wasn't like someone knocking to come in, it was just a random knock, 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 usually in threes. Sometimes just one set of 3 knocks, sometimes more. This happened randomly over the years. It always sounded unnatural. Definitely was not a rodent sound or duct work or anything. Very familiar with those sounds now as an adult living in an old 1920s home. Back at my grandma's, which had been where my mom had some of her experiences as a kid, I was around 7 to 8 and was laying down to go to sleep in the back bedroom with my little brother who was between 45. This bedroom was smaller but had a king bed and a dresser on the wall at the foot of the bed and a small walk space, 2 feet wide maybe, on either side of the bed. The floor is like an old-style vinyl tile that stays kind of gritty at times from the kids playing outside in the sand driveway. This house is in a one-stop sign town in the middle of nowhere on 350 acres. Super rural. I hear heavy, dragging, bare feet walk the length of the bed by the wall I have to my back. And then it stops. I gather the courage to turn and look and see nothing but my brother has pushed himself up from his stomach and is staring at the wall where I hear the noise. He looks at me wide-eyed and asked him if he heard that too. He says yes. Confirmation. I tell him it's okay. Just lay down and go back to sleep. So we did eventually. That was the only time I ever heard anything there. But I know others heard stuff at that house. These are just the ones I remember, but I think there were a few more. When she was little, my mom was in her room one night trying to sleep when she heard some mumbling like people talking in the living room. She thought it was weird that her parents had visitors so late and kept trying to hear what they were talking about. But she couldn't make out what they were saying, just that it sounded like men talking. She finally heard, "Here it comes," and at that exact moment a real bad thunderstorm blew in, like it was still and quiet up until she heard those words. Next morning, at the breakfast table, her younger brother asked my grandparents who would stop by, and they said no one. They were asleep. He had heard the same thing my mom heard. My grandma decided that total strangers just let themselves into the house while everyone was sleeping to get out of the storm and just kindly left when it was over. My grandma is a sweet lady. People don't do that here. That's how you get shot. My older brother would tell my mom that there was a ghost when he was 2 to 3 years old. He always told her it was behind the TV that sat at an angle in the living room corner, big old floor TV, and that he was friendly, but his name wasn't Casper. My younger cousin, when he was maybe 14 to 15, was at the house alone, heard a car pull up and door shut. He was in the living room, which is where you enter the house. So when no one came in, he went outside and there was no car there. Remember, we are in the middle of the country. No neighbors, no street traffic, nada. Just the cows and the chickens. I spent the night at a friend's house in 5th grade for her birthday, me and another girl. B-Day friend was the stepdaughter of a cop and was taught how to handle a gun and also had a small dog. Is coming to play later. Next day, for XYZ reason, we were left alone to hang out for a while. She was an only child, so both upstairs bedrooms were hers. Stairs start at the front door. You go up, turn right to the landing, then you have a bedroom on the left and right side with a flat wall in between that has a tiny attic door access. We just came out of right side room, one she slept in, looked for something in the left room, play junk room that had a play kitchen with the metal pots and pans in it, and had closed that door almost all the way since that's how I found it, slightly ajar. The object we were looking for was stored in the attic. So friend opened the little door and found what we were looking for. Friend was crouched in the attic. Myself and other friend had backs towards the room we just came out of. Heard the little dishes all crash down off the play kitchen. We all look around at the room startled, and realize the door is now fully closed. We were 2 feet away and never heard it close. We run downstairs to her parents' bedroom at the bottom of the stairs and lock the door. Birthday friend finds stepdad's gun and is prepared to hold things down. I hide panicking. Other girl is just standing there. We hear footsteps come down the wood stairs, hear her dog barking, then yelp in pain. I am petrified that I am about to be the next unsolved mysteries case. Birthday friend has gone cocked in balls of steel. Opens door and no one. We search the rest of the house. Empty. Calls the stepdad to come home. No signs of entry. Nothing out of place except the dishes that fell on the floor. Dishes can fall on their own, but not close doors, walk downstairs, and/or kick dogs. That was the last time I spent the night at her house. Back at my house, my stepdad replaced the flooring in the entry and hallway 1 year. It was old carpet, so he changed it to ceramic tile to make it easier to clean. After this, I occasionally thought I heard footsteps, bare feet walking down the short hallway. The most prominent time that I couldn't blame on someone else or rationalize was one day when I was home alone, 12-ish, after school sitting in living room watching BET and MTV music videos and thought I heard something. So I turned the volume all the way down and heard the footsteps walking very clearly. I just stared at the hallway entrance waiting for someone to come around the corner, but they never did. Called my big bro to come home from work so I wouldn't be alone. He couldn't leave, so I sucked it up and turned the volume on TV full blast and pretended it didn't happen. Older brother's girlfriend, G, was often home alone on the computer in my mom's room, opposite end of the hallway than the living room, waiting for my brother to get off of work, and had the exact same experience. I heard them randomly over the years, but that was the most clear time for me. My brother's bedroom, as they shared a room, the door would randomly shut and lock, but could be picked with a bobby pin or paper clip because it was just a push-button lock. I was stoked when I debunked that as paranormal 1 year. There was a supply then that would pull the door shut closed when the air kicked on, and the lock would be pushed in by the strike plate for the closet door inside their bedroom when the door was pushed open too hard. Awesome. One less creepy occurrence for me to freak out over. Until it happened one time when I was with G across the hall in my mom's room on the computer. We were alone. We heard a noise in the room, looked, and realized the door had been shut. We thought it was a robber because of the noise, so we armed ourselves with my softball bats, went to use a bobby pin to pop the lock. As soon as I popped the lock and had my hand softly grasping the knob to turn it, the knob turned by itself and the door opened just far enough the latch wouldn't catch and you could push the door open. I threw my hand back and stared at Gabby like, "Did you just see that?" She did. The room was empty, but out of panic, we beat the life out of some stuffed animals my little brother had covered up on the bottom bunk that looked coincidentally like a poorly hidden robber. Rest in peace, Teddy. Came home one day after school, got off the bus, pulled out my house key, walked to the front door, opened it, took one step inside, and heard my mom's bedroom door slam shut. Hard. My thoughts, all in a couple of seconds, hadn't moved. Oh, my brother is home. Turn head and see his car not there. Okay, G is here. Yelled G's name, no response. Weird. So I sit still and listen. Silence. Move inside just enough to peer down a short hallway, the footstep one, and see my mom's bedroom door is wide open. I nope one out of there, leave my front door open, close the storm door, and peer around the sides of the house and backyard to check the windows. All are closed. No robbers. So I sit myself outside on the curb and wait for an adult to get home. Maybe 15 minutes later, Big Bro pulls up and asks why I'm outside. I explain what happened. He searches the house. Everything seemed empty, and life returned to normal. We never called the police during any of the intruder incidents because, deep down, I think I knew what it was from the beginning. Not long after the last incident, we moved into a newly built home in the country, and I didn't experience any strange occurrences there, at least not yet. That year, I was starting high school. One evening, when I was around 16, my mother got a call that my Mimi, my dad's mom, had been in a car accident. She broke down in tears, and I was standing there when she received the news. But for some reason, I felt completely calm. I didn't feel panic, worry, or sadness, just calm. I told her everything was going to be okay. And I meant it. Mimi and my aunt had always gone out of their way to keep us close after my dad passed, and we had a strong bond. Felt strange not to be upset, but everything turned out okay. Mimi had sustained injuries but was recovering. A year later, during my senior year, out of nowhere, Mimi suffered major complications from the original car wreck injury and was hospitalized. My mom asked me if she needed to worry, and somehow I just knew. Yes, I said. We need to worry, and we need to go see her ASAP. She lived about 3 hours away. Mimi passed away shortly after on March 6, 2004. That summer, I found out I was pregnant. It hit me hard that Mimi wouldn't be there to celebrate the birth of her only son's only granddaughter. The pregnancy went fairly normal, but about 2 weeks before my due date, I unexpectedly went into labor around 2:30 a.m. I rushed to the hospital, had to undergo an emergency C-section, and my baby was immediately placed in the NICU with a slim chance of survival. My son was born on March 6, 2005, exactly 1 year to the date and to the time of my dad's mother's passing. My son was released from the NICU less than 2 weeks later, healthy, and he's now 14 years old. I've always been prone to seeing paranormal things since I was a child. Before I was born, my mom had a miscarriage, and my imaginary friend turned out to be my sister, Alex, but that's another story entirely. When I was about 3 years old, my mom and I moved into a new house with her new boyfriend. He was a narcissist and emotionally abusive, which might explain why the Hat Man was so present during that time. I started waking up screaming in the middle of the night and having violent nightmares about things a child shouldn't be able to understand, mostly involving death or torture. The description of the Hat Man matches the entity I kept seeing perfectly. A shadowy figure with a trench coat who feeds off fear and attaches itself to vulnerable people who are emotionally drained or exude negative energy. The thing is, I didn't just see a shadow. I saw him clearly. His long beige trench coat, beige fedora or bowler hat, and his long nose. I remember seeing him sitting on our furniture or walking around the house in broad daylight. My mom always told me it was just my imagination and that nothing would hurt me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there. From the time I was 3 to 8 years old, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but I couldn't. Some nights, I'd wet the bed because I was too scared to get up and face him. I'd lie in bed, restless and almost suffocating under my blankets, trying to hide from him. I remember hearing my heart pounding so loudly because I was so scared that it felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. During this time, I'd also see faces all over the place. In the ceiling, on the walls, in the carpets, truly everywhere. These weren't just random shapes or faces. They had defined features. I felt trapped, and despite my mom's repeated assurances that it was all in my head, I knew it wasn't. A few years later, I started seeing a therapist who combined both spiritual healing and actual psychology. I told her about the man with the hat who looked like a mysterious detective, and she suggested hypnosis as a way to help me connect with the spirits I saw as a child, so I could gain closure and help them move on. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, I was back in my childhood home, walking through the rooms again. I opened the front door, and it was dark. The whole house felt dark. Then, I saw my little sister, and she said, "Thank you for playing with me. I'll always guide you." That gave me a sense of relief. I walked around for a little while and opened another door. There, standing in the darkness, was the Hat Man. He was just standing there, but it was hard to see much of him, and he didn't show much emotion. I asked what he wanted in my house, but no luck. He just stood there, hat covering his face with no response. I started getting nervous at this point, so we stopped. A year after that session, I went to a medium because my childhood best friend passed away. I had already had a dream about her telling me that she was okay and happy, but I just wanted to hear from her one last time. The session itself lasted about 10 minutes, but I spent the next 2 hours with the medium telling her about this man. She said he sounds like a malevolent spirit, and I told her about how he would watch and torment me as a child. I identify as an atheist, but she gave me her St. Michael the Archangel statue right off of her desk and told me I needed to take it and ask him for protection. After all of this time, my mom finally admitted to me that she had also seen him too, and that she would pray every night that my soul would be protected and surrounded by light. I got baptized when I was 8 years old, and all of a sudden, I didn't see him or any of the spirits, including my sister, anymore. I still really don't believe in religion whatsoever. I do, however, believe in paranormal happenings, and I believe that having faith in anything that's pure does protect you. I have countless stories similar to this, and I tried for years to convince myself that ghosts weren't real, asking myself how and why do I believe demons and spirits are real if I don't believe in God. But honestly, I feel that some things are just too much for the human mind to comprehend. Does anyone else have an experience with the Hat Man? This has been on my mind non-stop since I discovered that he's a known entity and not just some random guy from the 1800s wandering around my old house. I've seen 5 shadow people since the summer of 2017 with a possible 6th encounter, but that story is 15 years old, and I never actually saw the entity, only its eyes. I've also seen many unexplained shadows, but shadow people are a completely different phenomenon. In my experience, they are tall, vantablack, and almost twitchy in their movements. And I only ever feel a heavy, oppressive presence whenever one shows up in my house. I document my paranormal experiences on a personal blog, but I keep those posts locked. This is the first time I'm sharing them with the broader internet, beyond my friends list. My first shadow person encounter happened in August of 2017. My mother and I are amateur paranormal investigators, and while we were working with a local team during our training, the topic of the thinning veil came up. This happened in the summer of 2017, just before the last solar eclipse visible in the United States. The lead investigator told us that we would likely experience a higher volume of paranormal activity leading up to the eclipse, followed by a sharp drop-off afterwards, and I honestly believe that. I live in a house with regular paranormal activity, and before the solar eclipse, these occurrences were fairly frequent, only to be followed by a sudden silence afterward. One experience, in particular, stands out as the scariest thing I've ever encountered, and I still haven't told my brother about what I saw in his room. I will one day, but not as long as we're living in this house. My brother is on several medications for mental illness, and I've taken on the responsibility of making sure he gets them for several reasons. One morning, as usual, I went into his room to give him his pills. He was still asleep in his bed, as he often was, but he wasn't alone. His bed at the time was pushed against the wall, and there was plenty of space between it and the rest of the room, but I saw this pitch-black figure, about 6 to 7 feet tall, just standing there. It was solid black, vantablack like I mentioned, and its head was shaking, twitching. I blinked, and it was gone. I left the room and didn't return for nearly an hour to give my brother his medication. But that's not even where it ends, and why this experience remains at the top of my scariest paranormal moments, even though the last one I'll share here could have easily taken that spot. The rest of the day, the hallway connecting my room and my brother's room to the rest of the house was filled with that oppressive feeling I now associate with shadow people. I was in the kitchen making something to eat, and I could feel eyes on me the entire time. It was eerie. I even had to psych myself up to leave my room to go to the bathroom because the feeling was so heavy, but I hadn't told anyone about it yet. My brother to this day still doesn't know about it, and I never shared it with my mom until the next morning. But that following morning, my mom told me that she had gotten the worst sleep of her life that night because of that heavy oppressive feeling. She was almost certain that someone had been standing there watching her sleep. I just responded with, "It's funny you should say that because you'll never believe what happened to me yesterday." That bad feeling hung around the hallway for the rest of the second day before it finally dissipated. In April of 2018, I saw my second one. On that day, a tornado down in the town and then proceeded to turn the corner and rip up farmland and tear the barns to shreds. It touched down merely 50 feet from my house in the parking lot of a local tourist attraction that sits on the other side of my house. I was not home when the storm hit. I was at the library with my family and the neighbor's daughter, listening to the news tell of a confirmed touchdown in our town. Once the tornado warning lifted, we hightailed back home. Fortunately, we survived with minimal damage. We were missing a little bit of siding, and I had to pull my trash cans out of the woods. And it knocked a piece of my fence down, but otherwise we were unharmed. One neighbor had the roof ripped off of their shed like a sardine can, and there was a tree that had impaled itself to the roof of one of the buildings of the aforementioned tourist attraction. But other than that, a booth getting tossed into the air and destroyed and some trees being knocked down, there was little damage in town until the tornado turned around the corner into farmland. There is still metal shrapnel embedded in the trees to this day. I can't say for sure that this next shadow person is related to this. I always found it suspicious that it happened the morning of the tornado, but it could honestly just have been a coincidence. But after a few hours before we left to the library, I saw a shadow person scurry down the hallway on all fours. It held that same, almost cartoonish twitchiness that the first one had, and it scurried fast, almost like a time lapse at triple speed, and then it was gone. There was that heavy feeling, but it was fleeting and gone just as fast as the figure was. In June of 2018, I threw a bottle of shampoo at a shadow person. Our water heater had gone out, and for a bit until we brought it to our landlord's attention, we just made do with boiling water on the stove and filling the bathtub and taking baths. I was taking a bath one morning watching YouTube when my phone propped up on the toilet lid when I saw a black void bolt from behind the toilet and disappear behind the trash can on the other side of the bathroom. My first reaction was to throw the shampoo bottle at it, but it just bounced off of the bathroom door. I did not stay in there long enough for it to reappear. In September of 2018, I saw a shadow person number 4. At least I think it was a shadow person. It had the same solid Vantablack composition, the same supernatural speed, but I never felt that heavy feeling. That was just weird. But I was in the kitchen waiting for my food to finish cooking in the microwave and leaning against the counter and playing on my phone when this pitch black shadow just squeezes itself between myself and the counter, gets up in my face for all of a fraction of a second, and then slips back down and disappears. Certainly the weirdest thing I've ever experienced. Shadow person number 5 in second scariest of my life happened just a few months ago at the beginning of January 2019. I have 3 dogs, and taking them outside is a challenge in itself during the day. But at night, it's borderline dangerous. All 3 dogs are poorly behaved, one of whom is like a horse and the other 2 little dogs who like to get under everyone's feet, not to mention the risk of stepping in poop. It wasn't 100% dark outside yet. It was the final phase of twilight where everything was bathed in a dark blue. My dogs were doing their business when my littlest dog started barking his little head off at something across the yard. This is normal for him. He barks at absolutely everything, so normally I wouldn't have been fazed. But it was that heavy feeling that caught my attention. And as I turned to look in that direction, I saw a shadow person charging across the yard right at me. It stood out like a twitchy, inky splotch in a vaguely human shape against the twilight, and I immediately turned tail and dragged the dogs who had not finished their business back inside. My mom was not home that night, and I immediately called her to tell what happened. She tries to tell me that it was a residual haunting. She thinks everything is just a residual. This was 100% not a residual haunting. This happened in April of 2020, when my sister and I were 13 and 14, respectively. My sister has a tendency to overreact in situations, which usually makes things seem worse than they actually are. This detail will be important later. It was around 6 p.m., and our mom was out visiting friends and wouldn't be back until late. Our older sister was at our dad's, so it was just me, my sister, and our 10-year-old brother at home. My sister and I decided to take our dog for a walk around the primary school down the road from our house. To give you a better idea of what the school looked like, let me describe it. We live in Australia, and the school was your typical public Australian school. It had 2 large ovals and several separate buildings scattered around the property, not just one big building. We walked through the school grounds to get to the oval where we planned to let our dog run around. After about 15 minutes there, my sister gasped and grabbed my shoulder. "I think I just saw someone," she said. Her eyes darted around, scanning the area in a panic. "It's probably just a cleaner," I replied calmly. "If they ask, we'll tell them we're just letting our dog run around." As I mentioned, my sister tends to overreact, so I didn't take her too seriously. But looking back, that was a mistake. We continued to hang out, checking our phones and occasionally looking up to watch our dog. By around 6:30, I decided it was time to head home. I glanced around for our dog and noticed he was staring intently at a building behind me. I stood up to look around but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Feeling a little annoyed, I turned back to my sister. "We'd better head home before it gets dark," I said, grabbing our dog's lead and calling him over. I clipped the lead on him and began heading toward the exit when my sister grabbed my arm again. "What?" I asked, irritated. I turned around and saw the fear on her face. "Don't look now, but there's a man over there, hiding behind the building." My stomach dropped. I wasn't sure if she was messing with me. I didn't want to look for fear that if he was there, he might notice us and start coming toward us. "Let's just go," I said slowly, and we began walking away from the building, hoping to get out of his sight. But once we were clear, we bolted all the way home, practically breaking the door handle trying to get inside. We collapsed on the floor, breathless. "Was there actually a guy there?" I asked between gasps. "Yes, he was hiding behind the building, just like I said," my sister replied. A strange instinct took over me, and I suddenly felt the need to lock up the house. So that's exactly what I did. I quickly darted around the house and locked every door and possible entry, as well as pulled down all the curtains over the windows, so that no one could see in. I sat on the couch and turned to my sister and said, "Do you think maybe he was a teach?" I got cut off by a knock on our front door. Our eyes widened and our mouths hung open. It couldn't have been our mom, since she wasn't supposed to be back until at least 11 o'clock. And even if she was early, she had a key. Or if she didn't, for some reason, she would have called out. She wouldn't have knocked. And it wasn't our older sister because we didn't hear a car pull up outside, which we definitely would have, and she also would have called out. Another knock came from the door. This time, the person on the other side spoke. "Hello, I have mail for you." My mouth dropped wider. Their voice didn't belong to anyone we knew, and it was rasp and husky, like they had lost their voice. It was then that our brother came out of his room and said loudly, "Who's at the door?" Both me and my sister cringed on how loud it was, knowing whoever was at the door definitely heard him. The person at the door spoke again. "Yeah, open the door. I have something for you." Our brother looked at us in confusion, and we both shook our head and told him to get down. He crawled on the ground and tried to ask what was going on. I put my finger over my mouth and motioned for us to go to the kitchen. We all crawled our way to the kitchen and huddled in the corner. "What do we do?" my sister shakily asked. My brother at this point was crying from confusion and fright, and me being the oldest, felt I was in charge and had to decide what to do. I didn't think I could call the police because we weren't sure what this person's intentions were. All of a sudden, we heard the back door handle jiggle. I whipped my head towards it and put my hand over my mouth in shock. Our town was usually very safe, so for this to be happening was absolutely terrifying. I looked to grab my phone to call the police, but I couldn't find it. I then realized I left it on the couch. The bad thing about this was to get to the living room. You have to pass the back door, and the back door has a glass window at the top, allowing anyone to see in. I turned my head towards my sister and quietly asked, "Do you have your phone?" My stomach dropped when she replied, "No. It's on the charger by the TV." I breathed in deeply and crawled slowly towards the back door. The handle was still jiggling, almost like they were trying to unlock it. Luckily, the back door has a double lock, so I wasn't worried about that. I peered my head cautiously around the corner to look at the back door, and that's when I saw him. His hair was matted and shoulder length. His eyes were dark and bloodshot, and his skin was pale and yellow. He saw me and began to bang against the door, desperately trying to get in. I quickly got up and ran to the couch and grabbed my phone and dialed 000. I told the operator that someone was attempting to break in, and it was then that the man started yelling gibberish. The operator heard this and asked for our address so that he could send someone out. It was then that I heard a big crack. It was the door. He was ramming himself into it, and the door was caving in. Quicker than I had ever moved before, I ran back to the kitchen and grabbed my sister and brother, and ran with them to the bathroom and locked the door and told them to get down. I scolded myself for not grabbing some sort of weapon before I locked us in, with no exit if this man manages to get in. Then, we heard the scariest sound, the door breaking in completely. He was in the house. He was still yelling and now running around the house, opening every door, searching for us. Luckily, about 2 minutes after this, we heard police sirens, and the man's yelling ceased. We hear him quickly run out of the house, and then we hear the police shouting at him to get on the ground, and another police officer enters the house and calls out for us. I slowly open the door and peer out to a female police officer looking around. I walk towards her shakily and start breaking down in front of her. I usually don't like the police, but on this occasion, I could never be more grateful for them. I hate to think, what if we didn't go to the bathroom, or if I looked towards him when we were at the school? I'd like to share my story now. About a year ago, I was working as a driver for Uber. As you might imagine, the job involved meeting all kinds of people: drunk people, quiet people, loud people, and, in rare cases, creepy people. This story, however, doesn't involve a creepy person. It involves my one and only terrifying experience. One evening around 11 p.m., I was starting to feel tired. I had been working for several hours, and I had decided to pick up just one more rider before calling it a night. This last person's pickup location was in a particularly bad, eerie neighborhood. About a week prior, I had dropped off another group of people in that same area. I pulled up to the house set as the pickup location and immediately noticed how run down and vacant it looked. It didn't seem like anyone should be living there. Before I could even inform him via my phone that I had arrived, a man walked out of the house. He looked normal, which was a huge relief. He got into the back of the car and greeted me, thanking me for picking him up. I asked where he needed to go, but instead of giving me an address like usual, he told me to head down the street and take a right. I didn't think much of it and followed his instructions. After a few more turns, he directed me to get on the freeway and go about 15 miles, then exit on Lincoln Boulevard. I was happy to hear this because it wasn't too far from where I lived, and since it was my last ride for the night, I didn't want to drive too far from home. Once I got off on Lincoln, he told me to drive about 4 miles and make a right. After those directions, I started to feel uneasy. As I drove those 4 miles and made the right, he then told me to take a left on Jefferson, a mile up the street. At this point, my nerves really started to build. He was giving me directions that were leading into my neighborhood. I followed his instructions and made the left. I asked, "What's next?" But there was no immediate response. I glanced at the rearview mirror and my heart sank. He was staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. I asked again, and after a moment, he replied, "Go about another mile, then make a left on Patterson." My heart was pounding now. That was the street I lived on. Was this guy directing me to my house? I felt a cold chill run through me. I made the left turn, my hands gripping the wheel, and asked, "What now?" Without hesitation, he said, "Up the street here. My house is on the right." I was frozen, too scared to speak, unsure of what was really happening. I felt sick. I kept driving and started to slow down a bit. I, without looking at it, passed my house slowly and said, "Which one?" He was silent. He responded in a very quiet and sinister voice, "You just passed it." I stopped the car and my heart was now throbbing. I looked in the rear view mirror to see him smiling. I spoke, "Which one is it?" Still looking at him, he replied to me without breaking his gaze or his smile, 1905. I got out of the car immediately after hearing him say that. That was my address. I started backing up into the middle of the street. I took my phone from my pocket and called 911. He got out of the car on the opposite side of me. I backed up into my neighbor's bushes and made the choice to run and knock on their front door. I did, and after pounding for a moment, I turned around to see where he was, expecting to see him right behind me, but he was nowhere in sight. They answered the door and I told them what just happened. A police officer showed up shortly after that, but the man was gone. Your guess is as good as mine how he knew where I lived, what my address was. I still have no idea. I didn't see him again. I never picked up another person after that. For some backstory, I was in 7th grade, heading home from my school in the downtown area of my city. The bus ride was usually made up of a predictable crowd: teenagers heading home from school, working-class adults, and unfortunately, single mothers with their kids, all trying to save a few bucks by taking the bus. Alongside these regular passengers, there were the two types of disturbances: loud, disruptive drug addicts or alcoholics begging for money, and middle-aged men who seemed to prey on middle schoolers or young women. I had my fair share of encounters with both, but today's story isn't about my experience. It's about something I witnessed. I had a front row seat to this crazy situation, though. Let's set the scene. I found a seat near the back of the bus by myself. The bus setup was a bit tricky to explain. There was a row of seats on each side with 2 seats per row, and there was also this twisty part in the middle of the bus. 2 seats faced each other in that twisty area. On the opposite side of me sat a working-class man with a few teenagers behind me. And in front of me, we had the main characters of this story: a dingy, unshaven man and 3 teenage girls. The man sat directly across from me, and the girls were sitting in the twisty seats in front of him. One of the girls, not wanting to sit next to a stranger, decided to sit in one of her friend's laps. When the man saw this, he started laughing to himself in this creepy way, then began adjusting his position in a suggestive manner. As the ride went on, he noticed the girl and began patting his thigh, almost as if he was inviting her to sit there. Then he started verbally expressing it, saying things like, "Come here, come sit here instead," and "You belong right here." Everyone on the bus caught on, and all eyes were on him. The girl scowled at him and turned away. Her friends threw a few light insults his way, but he was undeterred. He then turned to the working-class man, who was watching the whole situation unfold, and said something like, "Why is she sitting there? She needs to be on my lap instead." He even commented on the girl's body, acting as if he was pals with the man, nudging him with his arm as though they were on the same side. Just to clarify, the girl was clearly a high schooler. Our district required specific school uniforms, so she was wearing khaki shorts, a button-up shirt, and had a backpack. There's no way this man could have thought she was anything but underage, but he didn't seem to care. Hearing these disgusting remarks, the working-class man finally spoke up and told him something like, "Hey, don't you ever associate me with whatever you think this is. This is a child you're talking about." He added, "I come from Detroit. We put people like you in the dirt." The creepy man didn't seem to care at all. He scoffed and made a dismissive hand gesture, as if brushing off the working-class man's words. The working-class man's stop was coming up, and as he stood to leave, he apologized to the girl for what she had to endure. Then he left. The girl tells him on his way out, "Thank you, but I'll be able to handle it. Just gotta wait." The gross man turns back to her and says, "Handle what? Me?" and laughs to himself. I was appalled at his gross statements, but even angrier than me were the adults and male thugs who started standing in the area where the situation was, all witnesses to this atrocity. I remember hearing the guys all started getting riled up behind me in defense of the girl. Now, this guy starts to get a bit scared. He has now stopped talking upon seeing how many people are against him. The girl again goes on to assure the crowd that she's got everything under control and things calm down a bit. That is, until he pulls the string to notify the driver that he wants to leave at the next stop. In a split second, everyone's eyes were back on him. The thugs began standing up again just in case he plans to run from whatever the girl has in store for him. The bus begins to arrive to the stop, and as the man stands up, so does the girl. He attempts to walk past her, but upon approaching her, she pushes him back, not to get him off his feet, but to get him back from the forming group of people. She does this because he stumbles backward. She swings her belt off her waist and yells, "You like to prey on little girls? You like flirting with little girls as a grown man?" and starts beating the brakes off this guy with it. And yes, she was using the metal side. My ears filled with clinking of metal on his body and his head, the slapping of the leather on his skin, and the moans and cries of this fully grown man who is now on the ground in tears attempting to escape his well-deserved beating. The bus ends up completely stopping, the driver running back to separate the two. The girl is still beating the man with all her might as the bus driver rushes over to pick her up and pull her away from the man. The man ends up crawling on hands and knees off the bus where he had been laid on the concrete moaning and crying in pain. Everyone was escorted off the bus and the police were soon called to get the man medical attention. The police ended up detaining the girl and I couldn't find any information about her charges. But I hope wherever she is, she's having a good day. As for the man, all I can say is just don't be a creep, and bad things won't come to you. I admire that girl's bravery, and the passengers that bonded together for the safety of the girl were the best demonstration of what a community should be that I have ever seen. Back when I was in my mid-20s in the late 1980s, I was really into hiking and camping. But since my home state of Rhode Island is so small, I quickly ran out of local campgrounds to visit. That's when I started craving something a bit wilder. I'd heard a lot of great things about the Appalachian Trail, how hiking it was a huge accomplishment for people who love the outdoors. My uncle, on my dad's side, had hiked the entire trail in one summer back in the 50s. He never stopped talking about it whenever I'd bring up hiking. He made it sound like the trail was pure magic, with wilderness just waiting to be explored. Inspired by his stories, I decided to follow in his footsteps. I couldn't take enough time off work to walk the whole trail, but if I planned it right, I could hike the southern portion, from Harper's Ferry to Asheville, North Carolina, in just a couple of weeks. It seemed like the perfect way to fulfill a hiking dream I had been nurturing for years. So, in the summer of 1989, I hopped on a bus and then a train, heading to Harper's Ferry with all my hiking and camping gear packed up. After picking up a few last-minute supplies, I made my way onto the Appalachian Trail and began what would be the adventure of a lifetime. The first few days of hiking were tough, but I quickly got used to the physical strain. I've never been as exhausted or as hungry as I was on those first nights up in the Appalachian Mountains. To protect myself from the insects, I had brought a hammock with me after hearing some terrifying stories about the bugs down in West Virginia. Things like assassin bugs with spiked mouths or cow killer ants, whose stings were supposedly so painful that they could even kill a cow. That might have been an exaggeration, but it was enough to make me cautious. So every night after my hike, I'd take out my hammock, tie it between two trees, and settle in for the night. It wasn't the most comfortable sleep, but I didn't mind, especially since it kept the black widows off me. However, being out in the woods without shelter meant that every little noise from the nocturnal animals would wake me up. It was annoying, but that's just part of bonding with nature. One night, I woke up thinking I'd heard something rustling in the leaves nearby. As I shifted in my hammock and looked over my shoulder, I felt my blood run cold. There, looming over me in the darkness, was a large shape. At first, I froze, my eyes adjusting to the darkness, and then I realized it was a person standing perfectly still, just staring at me. Without thinking, I quickly rolled out of my hammock and bolted into the trees. I didn't care who it was. Whoever stands over someone like that doesn't have good intentions, and I wasn't sticking around to find out. I ran as far as I could, until I found a safe spot in the woods to catch my breath. After a few minutes, I circled around and made my way back to my camp, hoping to check it out before grabbing my things and moving to a safer location. As I carefully approached, I saw my camp was completely deserted, with all my gear seemingly untouched. But something didn't sit right. I had a sickening feeling in my stomach that the person had just backed off to watch me from a distance, waiting for me to return so they could ambush me. If they weren't there to steal from me, I feared they wanted something much worse, though I dreaded to think about what exactly that was. Regardless, I grabbed my stuff and got out of there as quickly as I could. Over the next few days, I hiked hard and fast, doing everything I could to get as far away from that area as possible. After that, I thought I was in the clear. No one bothered me during the following hikes, and I convinced myself that I was safe from that point forward. But I was wrong. Hideously wrong. Every single night since that incident had me struggling to get to sleep. I kept picturing that person standing over me, just staring down at me in the darkness. I had no idea how long they had been there or what they had in mind for me, and I was just glad that I had gotten out of the area. But still, I didn't start to feel safe again until I had bought some fishing line from a sporting goods store in one of the small towns I passed through on my way down the trail, which I could then use to make trip wires that ran between the trees close to where I was camping. Then a couple of empty cans of beans strung together, and whoever snagged their foot on the wire would make the cans clank together, alerting me to their presence. I had one big scare when a fox snagged the line and I rolled out of my hammock with a knife in hand, ready to take on whoever was about to creep up on me, only to see the furry little guy scurrying away in the moonlight. I did end up laughing to myself about that one. And after that, I stopped sleeping with my knife in my hand because all it would have taken was one little slip and I would be in a whole world of trouble. About a week went by, and I had just gotten over the whole shadowy figure in the night incident. I had to be almost 100 miles away from where it had taken place, and I had no trouble at all in any of the other nights, save the incident with the fantastic Mr. Fox that had just about scared the crap out of me. So with the help of my little tripwire alert device, I had just started being able to get to sleep without any trouble again. But that night, I woke up suddenly to find that I couldn't move properly. I couldn't bring up arms from my sides at all, and the material from my hammock seemed to be pushed up right into my face. I was cocooned by it, like the fabric was wrapped around my entire body. This has only just registered in my half-awake brain when I heard the sound of fabric snapping. Then boom, I hit the dirt hard, completely knocking the wind out of me. I had no idea what was going on, struggling to break out of the hammock, only I couldn't. That's when I felt the hammock being dragged across the forest floor. Then it hit me. Whoever was dragging me across the ground had bundled me up in my own hammock with some kind of cord, cut the ropes tying me to the trees, and was proceeding to drag me off to God knows where. I screamed at the very top of my lungs for whoever it was to let me out, but no one responded. All I could hear was the sound of the hammock's fabric rustling against the forest floor. I knew I had to think fast or whatever was going on wouldn't end well at all. Like I said, I had stopped sleeping with my knife in my hand or nearby me in the hammock because that was just an accident waiting to happen. So I had absolutely nothing handy to cut through the material and make my escape, or so I thought. In a flash, I had an idea. A few years back, my dad had gifted his old wristwatch to me. It was a reliable old thing, but I had just one complaint about it. The little latch thing that kept it tied to my wrist was worn with age and was actually a little sharp from the years of use. I had managed to accidentally poke myself a few times with it in the process of picking it up or putting it on. And one time it actually drew blood. I knew what I had to do. I unbuckled the watch as quickly as I could, which wasn't easy considering I was getting dragged along the ground in pitch black darkness, and managing to pinch the sharp clasp between my thumb and index finger was even harder. But still, I managed it, and when I did, I began to rake it against the fabric of the hammock. It was just as effective as cutting canvas as it was cutting skin. And although it took a few tries, it didn't take long until I could see the subtle glow of silvery moonlight from the other side. I kept cutting as quickly and quietly as I could manage until there were so many cuts that I could rip myself out of the canvas cocoon, like some sort of a terrified newborn bursting out of a womb. You'll have to excuse the analogy, but in retrospect, that's exactly what it seemed like happened. I was born again that night. I got a second chance at living. Escaping that hammock meant life, because I knew that staying in it would have meant death. For the second time in about 10 days, I found myself bounding through the dark woods. Only that second time, the terror in me dwarfed what I had felt the first time around. I don't even know how I managed to escape. Assuming it was the same figure standing over me the first night, they had somehow managed to track me for more than 100 miles and sneak past my tripwires. They were a far better woodsman than me, probably physically fitter too. I just know that by the time I reached a house with its lights on, I turned to look behind me as I was banging on the door. There was no one else around. The family who lived there were kind enough to put me up for the night after I called the local sheriff, who came out in the morning to help me retrace my steps through the woods. We found my camp, but not the hammock. And although I told him everything in excruciating detail, I could tell he was skeptical of my story. He even suggested that I had just gotten lost and frightened in the dark and had ended up jumping at shadows. Maybe even had a bad dream that seemed a little too vivid because of the lack of proper rest. But I know it was real, just from the way my palms were sweating riding this back. I'm certain that night really did happen the way I remember it. I never did finish that dream hike. The next day, I caught a bus back towards Harper Ferry, then took the train all the way back to Providence, and I only ever told a handful of people about what happened on the trails. I figured not many would really believe me. They would just think I was telling a campfire tale or something. I didn't tell my hiking uncle for the longest time. I thought he would just gloat or whatever, tell me that I didn't have it in me to do something that tough. But when I finally did share my story, I got a reaction that I definitely wasn't expecting. He just nodded and told me that there were some nights that he didn't think he would make it out alive either. I'd heard stories about people living in those mountains, generations of outlaws who have been living outside of society for as long as anyone can remember, living by their own rules and detached from the natural order of things. My uncle, who had hiked the Appalachian Trail himself, shared some of his close calls with me. Times when he ran into people who weren't nearly as friendly as the typical West Virginians. He'd even seen things he knew he wasn't supposed to see, though he was always tight-lipped about the details. It made me think twice about venturing back into those mountains on my own. I told myself I'd give it another shot when I was older, wiser, and perhaps a little better prepared, maybe with something a bit bigger to defend myself with. After all, the trail would still be there, waiting for me. But then again, so might whoever tried to drag me off that night. I deliver pizzas, and I had been having a really hectic night. Non-stop back and forth, barely any time to pause, let alone take a bathroom break. I had been drinking tons of water, too, since there was a heat wave in our area, so my bladder was starting to protest. Then, as I was driving to a particular delivery, the urge hit me like a ton of bricks, going from 0 to 60 in an instant. Luckily, I was close to the customer's house, so I thought I could quickly get it done and take care of business after. I pulled up to the house, and since it was an area I'd delivered to before, I immediately noticed something was off. All the lights were off, no glow from a TV or anything. It was extra noticeable because the streetlight closest to the door was out of order. On top of that, the entire block was dead quiet. This was a big university area, so it was unusual for it to be so still, especially in July. There had to be at least one person here since someone ordered the pizza. Maybe they were sitting in the dark or were in the backyard. I wasn't sure, but I didn't want to get out of my car and knock on a silent house in the middle of the night without checking that I had the right address and that someone was actually inside. It was so hot that night, even after sundown, and my car's AC was barely doing anything. Plus, the hot pizzas weren't helping the situation. I decided to keep the car door closed as much as possible to preserve whatever cool air was left. So, I called the customer's number. A voice on the other end answered, sounding a little breathless and a bit abrupt. "Yeah," I kept it short and simple. "Hey, it's your pizza out front, but it doesn't look like anyone's home." The customer replied, still gasping for breath, "Yeah, I'm not at home." At that point, I was in a lot of discomfort, and the urgency to pee was making me way less patient than I would usually be with a customer. "Well, then we're gonna have to cancel the order because I've arrived within the delivery window, and you were supposed to pay in cash. I don't know what to tell you. Plan ahead next time." I instantly regretted snapping at her, especially when the voice on the other end came through more clearly. Turns out it was a young, bubbly, and very distraught girl, probably no older than 20 or 25. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I was running down the street so I could barely hear you," she cried. "I just switched you out of my AirPods. Is that better? I'm sorry. I completely lost track of time at work. But I knew you were coming. That's why I'm literally running home right now. Please don't leave. I'm starving and I don't have a car. Seriously, please don't leave. 5 minutes tops. Okay? I know what it's like to be hungry and running late and have no car and not live near any restaurants." Plus, when I heard her voice, I began to remember more specifically having delivered to this place a couple times before, and she had always been perfectly nice. Now, I felt bad for snapping at her. I tried to walk it back while simultaneously looking out my window for potential spots to pee. No, my bad. I'm letting the heat get to me and it's not your fault. No need to rush. I'll see you when you get here." I hung up and, while surveilling the area, was starting to think I was really out of luck. All the other houses had people in them and were close together, so there were no clumps of trees or out-of-the-way patches of land or anything. Of course, I had just tossed my empty water bottle at the last delivery because I'm an idiot. Finally, I decided it was escalating to the point of an emergency, and the safest bet was to use a bush in front of the woman's house. She wasn't home. The street light was out, so no one would see me. The people who were home were inside. My car was parked across the street, and we're a small shop and we don't wear uniforms. So if someone did spot me, they would have no way to connect me to my employer. Animals pee outside all the time. Humans are animals. This is fine. I scurried over to the tallest bush in her front yard. She didn't really have much of a yard. More just a walkway lined with bushes and flowers that ran adjacent to her front door. The biggest cluster of bushes, the only one where I could be sure there would be no visible splatter on the side of the house, was about 4 feet from her door. I looked both ways, unzipped and let it fly. After the initial millisecond of relief, I noticed the sound was way off, more like pissing on something solid than something leafy. I started panicking, thinking I had aimed wrong. But once I start, I can't stop midstream. So I kept squinting into the darkness to see if maybe I was hitting a key rock or something and could just move a few inches over. Instead, all of a sudden, I heard a way more concerning noise. A deep voice exclaiming, "What the heck?" And before I could turn around, assuming I had been caught by a neighbor, a man came leaping out of the bushes. He blew by me, brushing my golden shower off him as he did. He spit pretty emphatically on the ground, so I think I might have beamed him right in the face. I didn't see where he went after a few paces, but though this next part is kind of a blur, I do think I remember hearing a car screech out from a bit further away after a minute. I had gotten some night vision by that point, so I was able to make out his height, build, and outfit, but only the most general details of each. I was in such shock that I didn't even put my thing away. I just stood there trying to figure out what had happened. The reality was so terrifying that my mind refused to accept it and impulsively searched for a reasonable explanation that could make everything okay. I thought, could these bushes lead to some backyard area and just look like they were against the house? Could they have been obscuring an open window? My inner voice was desperately screaming, "Bro, that man was wearing a hoodie in 90-degree weather. That was a bad man. You're in a bad situation." But the very idea that I was within inches of a guy who would be hiding in bushes at all, let alone in front of a young woman's house at night, just wasn't something I was ready to grapple with yet. I was coping by not coping. My fight or flight response totally failed me at that point because my idiot self did the absolute last thing I should have done and approached the bushes to try and validate this. There must have been a good reason for a man in a hoodie to be behind these bushes in the middle of the night. So I walked over to the side, turned on my phone flashlight, and tried to peer around the line of shrubbery. Pro tip: tattered drawstring bag sitting behind the bushes, slightly splashed with pee. But I was in such moronic daze from shock that I groped around for it, thinking, "See, this is it. This will explain why he was back here." It explained it. Once I maneuvered it over and pulled it open, I saw a sharp knife, a roll of duct tape, and a bottle of pills. The delusions officially broke at that point, and all the adrenaline, endorphins, and self-preservation instincts that had been suppressed kicked in 10 times over. I became whatever the opposite of dazed is, more laser-focused than I had ever been in my life, with one singular goal: get back to my car. I dropped the bag, booked it across the street, got in my car, and slammed the pedal to the floor before the door was even all the way closed. I went as far as I could as fast as I could until I hit a red signal. Then I pulled off to the side and realized I shouldn't be driving any more than necessary in the condition I was in. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour drugstore and took a breath. I was finally calm and coherent enough to zip up and formulate a plan of action. My first lucid thought was, who do I call first? The police or the girl whose house that was? I thought about it for what couldn't have been more than 10 seconds, but felt like an hour, and decided, okay, I'm in my locked car with my engine running. If trouble starts, I can drive away. I know something's up, she might not. She needs to know not to keep walking in that direction. But as I was dialing her number, it occurred to me, what if there was no girl? I thought I remembered delivering to that house before, but what if I was wrong? What if the girl on the phone was just a decoy to get me there to rob me, or worse, Every pizza guy on the planet has seen the Evil Genius documentary by now. So I thought. She called me all out of breath. She wasn't home. The whole thing was off. I can't risk it. I'll start with the cops. I called 911. The operator was very helpful in keeping me calm because I was a complete wreck by this point. He kept assuring me that someone would be there soon. I kept telling them that they had to get there before the girl did, but I was trying to express 3 thoughts at once and really damaging my own credibility. Came out more as you've got to save this girl because he wasn't after me. I was just delivering a pizza, unless they were after me. In which case, there might not be a girl, but I talked to one on the phone. So then, you should find that girl because they used her to lure me there. But if she's real, she doesn't know about the guy who was also real. And there could be even more guys if there's actually a girl. And you know what? Even if there isn't a girl, there might actually be more guys. I only checked one part of the bushes, so I don't actually know. But we'll know which guy is the one I saw because I pissed all over him, you know? I didn't mean to. This was back when I thought the girl was real, but not home. But she might be real, so you really need to find her if she is because the guy was real. Finally, they basically just asked me to stop talking and stay on the line. But that was when I saw an incoming call from the customer. I couldn't answer it without disrupting my 911 call, so I just ignored it. But then she sent me this text like, "Hey, I'm here. I don't see you." I told 911 she was there, and they said officers were only minutes away. But who knows how long that meant, especially after I had given such a scattered account of the events in my panic. I just felt overwhelmed with guilt because my rational mind said the odds of her being a decoy girl for some large scam targeting pizza guys were low. And the odds of her being the intended victim of a predator were high. So I put my 911 call on mute and turned back, heart absolutely pounding out of my chest, compulsively muttering, "Crap, crap, 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 crap," the entire way. Then, I took 911 off mute and told them I had returned to look for the girl. They weren't happy about that, but I saw her meandering past the parked cars in the street looking to see if one was mine. And I waved her down, flashing my brights. She bounced on over to the window of my car, happy-go-lucky. I figured that was a good sign that she wasn't in on whatever this was. But I was just so scared to be back in the general area and to not know what had just happened or what was going to happen. I kept whispering, "Get in, get in." And she was like, "Get it? Get it? Get it? Oh, you want me to get the pizza from the back?" I didn't want to make the same mistake with her that I had made with 911. So instead of trying to tell the whole story, I stuck to the bare basic facts. There was a man in your bushes. I'm on the phone with the police. I don't know where he is right now. Please get in the car so we can lock the doors. I was barely able to get even those sentences out, and I was shaking like I had had 10 cups of black coffee. I held up my phone with 911 on the call screen to verify it for her. I thought that was why she got in the car with no further explanation, but it turns out that wasn't entirely it. "You still there? Is she with you? Are you safe? Is anyone else there?" 911 kept checking in, not knowing who the third party I was talking to was. I reassured them, and we drove more cautiously this time to a location 911 instructed us to wait at to speak with the police after they cleared the area. I didn't actually have to do much after that. The police came pretty soon after. Police car met us at the house. I gave a statement, telling them everything I had observed, while the girl went to speak with other officers in more detail than they needed from me. It turns out the reason she got into a strange pizza guy's car without questioning my story too much was that she immediately recognized the man from my description. He was her abusive ex-boyfriend, and she knew right away who he was. He was apparently psychotic enough that as soon as she heard, "There's a guy in your bushes," he immediately came to mind. She later called to thank me and insisted on leaving a huge tip for the delivery. I wasn't there when the call came in, so the kid who answered didn't know to refuse it. But the manager had already promised that the next time we saw her, we'd load her up with enough one free pie cards to last a lifetime. It was easily the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, whether on the job or off. I don't get to tell the story much because I try to avoid sharing it with anyone who could possibly know the girl or know about the event. But I'll be honest, I'm not the same since that night. Even though I know the guy didn't have anything to do with me directly, the experience truly shook me to my core. This took place in September of last year. A friend of mine, let's call her A, mentioned that her friend B was looking for someone to watch her dog while she and her husband went on vacation to California. I knew that I was a dog sitter on an app called Rover, where people can hire others to take care of their dogs, walk them, and even house sit. Since I was looking to make some extra cash, I thought this would be a great opportunity. $200 for sitting a dog for 5 days sounded good to me, so I agreed. They introduced me to B, and about a week before I was supposed to start dog sitting, B showed me around her home and introduced me to her giant husky, Bear. I won't lie, Bear was huge, kind of chubby, but still super cute. B told me I could help myself to anything in the house, including food, which was a nice touch. The house had a secure front door with a keypad lock, so I felt pretty safe. Fast forward a week, and I arrived late on a Friday night, just after B and her husband left for California. The first 2 days were fairly uneventful. I was at work during the afternoons, but I'd swing by to feed Bear during my break and then head back to work. After work, I'd come home, take Bear for a ride in my car, and hang out. I'd stay up late watching movies and let Bear sleep next to me when it was time for bed. Then, on Monday night after work, I heard a knock at the door. I peered through the peephole and saw a man who appeared to be wearing a black police uniform. I thought it was a bit strange, but I decided to open the door to see what he wanted. He said, "I'm looking for Jorge." I replied, "Oh no, there's no Jorge here. I'm just dog sitting for a friend. I've been here since Friday." Looking back, it wasn't the smartest move to tell a stranger at the door that I was home alone. He responded, "Oh, okay. How long are you here for?" I answered, "Till Wednesday." Then he said, "Oh, that's cool. Okay, sorry to bother you." And he left. I was slightly weirded out and I locked the door. I texted friend B about what had just happened. She told me, "Oh, don't worry about it," and shrugged it off. I thought that was weird too. Things were normal again up until I went to bed Wednesday at midnight. As I was laying in bed, the thought kept coming to my mind that I should make sure the front door was locked. So I got up and checked. Luckily it was, but I still had a weird vibe. I fell asleep and then woke up at 3 o'clock and 5 seconds a.m. to the dog barking like crazy. It scared the heck out of me. I thought someone had broken in. I got up and went to the living room where I saw Bear was growling and barking at the front door. I looked through the peephole and saw the same guy with another guy this time, standing there in the dark, both in security guard uniforms. At this point, I was creeped out. Why would the same guy come back when he knew I was alone with my car in the driveway? I didn't even bother opening the door. 2 guys I didn't know dressed like security guards at 3 a.m. I made sure all the doors were locked. Then, I saw that they had walked off. I opened the door and didn't see any type of security car anywhere. I still have to thank Bear. I think his barking could have scared them off. I went back inside, returned to bed, and fell asleep. I didn't bother telling friend B, because she was in California anyway. What was she going to do? I'm glad to say, I only stayed one more night after that. To this day, I still don't know who those guys were or what they really wanted. And I haven't been back to dog sit since that incident. The lighthouse beam swept across the churning sea, a futile attempt to pierce the impenetrable fog that had swallowed the island for days. As I stood at the top of the tower, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there was watching me, waiting. At first, the isolation had been bearable, even welcome. But now, as the fog thickened and strange sounds echoed across the water, I began to realize that accepting this job might have been the biggest mistake of my life. The worst part? I was starting to suspect I wasn't as alone on this island as I'd thought. My name is Jack, and until 3 months ago, I was just another burned-out office worker looking for a change. When I saw the ad for a temporary lighthouse keeper position, it seemed like the perfect escape. 3 months on a remote island, just me in the lighthouse. No office politics, no deadlines, no stress. At least that's what I thought. The first few weeks were exactly what I'd hoped for. I settled into a rhythm of maintaining the lighthouse, keeping logs, and exploring the small rocky island. The solitude was refreshing, and I felt more relaxed than I had in years. But then the fog rolled in. It started as a typical marine layer, nothing unusual for this time of year. But day by day, it grew thicker until I could barely see the rocks at the base of the lighthouse. The world beyond had become a blank, white void. That's when I started hearing things. At first, it was the usual sounds of the sea and wind, but slowly, other noises crept in. Whispers, carried on the breeze, faint but unmistakably there. The scrape of something heavy being dragged across the rocks. And sometimes, late at night, a mournful wail that made my hair stand on end. I told myself it was just my imagination, my mind playing tricks after weeks of isolation. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It was on the 23rd day of fog that I saw it for the first time. I was doing my nightly check of the lighthouse lamp when movement caught my eye. There, just at the edge of the light's reach, stood a figure, tall and thin, motionless on the rocks, facing the lighthouse. As I stared, frozen in shock, it raised an arm and waved. The gesture was almost mocking in its casualness. I blinked, and it was gone. Sleep became elusive after that. I spent my nights pacing the lighthouse, jumping at every creak and groan of the old structure. During the day, I searched the island, hoping to find any sign of the figure I'd seen. But there was nothing. No footprints, no disturbed earth, not even a stray pebble out of place. As the days passed, the sightings grew more frequent. The figure would appear at the edge of the fog, always just out of clear sight. Sometimes it was alone. Other times, I could swear I saw multiple shapes moving within the mist. They never came any closer, never tried to approach the lighthouse. They just watched. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were fishermen, lost in the fog. But why didn't they call out for help? And how could they stand so still on those slippery rocks? I began to leave food out, thinking that if they were real people, they might be hungry. But the food remained untouched, eventually eaten by seagulls or washed away by the tide. It was the whispers that finally broke me. One night, as I huddled in my bed, trying to block out the sounds of the fog, I heard them clearly for the first time. They came from just outside my window, a chorus of voices speaking in a language I didn't understand. The words seemed to slither into my mind, leaving me with a sense of profound wrongness. I bolted upright, heart pounding. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a sound like nails scraping down the lighthouse wall. Something was climbing up towards my window. In a panic, I grabbed the emergency flare gun I kept by my bed and fired it out the window. The red light illuminated the fog for a brief, terrifying moment. And in that instant, I saw them, dozens of figures surrounding the lighthouse. Their bodies were wrong, too thin, too tall, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Their faces, I thank whatever gods may exist that I couldn't see their faces clearly. As the flare sputtered out, I heard a sound that I can only describe as disappointed, like a predator whose prey had narrowly escaped. Then silence. I spent the rest of the night in the lantern room, the brightest place in the lighthouse. As dawn broke and the fog began to thin slightly, I made a decision. I had to get off this island. There was a small motorboat docked on the island for emergencies. I hadn't used it, hadn't even checked on it since I arrived. Now, it was my only hope. I packed quickly, throwing some food and water into a bag. As I stepped out of the lighthouse, the fog seemed to retreat, like it was giving me space. I didn't trust it for a second. The path to the dock was treacherous, slippery with seaweed and morning dew. Every step felt like it might be my last. Like at any moment, one of those things might emerge from the fog and grab me. I reached the dock without incident, my spirits lifting as I saw the boat still tied up where it should be. But as I drew closer, that hope turned to ash. The boat was destroyed. The hull was smashed, long gouges torn in the metal as if by massive claws. The engine had been ripped out entirely, leaving a gaping hole. As I stood there, staring at my ruined escape route, I heard it, a low chuckle coming from the fog behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the swirling mist and the distant sound of waves. I ran back to the lighthouse, no longer concerned with stealth or caution. I slammed the door behind me, sliding every lock and bolt into place. For good measure, I dragged a heavy cabinet in front of it. Now I sit in the lantern room writing this account. The fog has closed in again, thicker than ever. I can hear them out there, moving around the lighthouse, waiting. I don't know what they are or what they want. I don't understand why they haven't just broken in and taken me. Maybe they can't enter the lighthouse itself. Maybe this is part of some twisted game they're playing. All I know is that I can't stay here forever. My food will run out eventually. The lamp needs constant maintenance to keep burning. And I'm not sure how much longer I can endure this psychological torment. I've tried the radio again and again, but all I get is static. Sometimes, I think I hear voices in the static whispering in that same unknown language. I turn it off quickly when that happens. If anyone finds this, please send help. But be careful. Don't trust the fog. Don't trust what you see in it. And whatever you do, don't trust the lighthouse keeper. Because I'm not sure, after all this time in the fog, if I'm still entirely myself. The lamp needs tending. I have to go wind the mechanism, make sure the light keeps turning. It's the only thing keeping them at bay, I think. As long as the light shines, I'm safe. I hope, but every time I look out at that fog, I can't help but wonder, am I keeping them out, or am I trapping myself in? And how long before the line between the two blurs, just like everything else in this godforsaken place? The fog is calling, and God help me, some part of me wants to answer. The trees seemed to murmur as I stumbled through the dense brush, my heart racing, matching the pace of my hurried steps. I was lost, completely lost, and the dimming daylight only intensified my rising fear. Then, just as despair began to set in, I spotted it. A glimmer of hope, a small cabin, its windows glowing with a warm, welcoming light. I had no idea that crossing into that cabin would drag me into a nightmare far worse than simply being stranded in the woods. I had always trusted my instincts when it came to navigation and outdoor adventures. Hiking was my escape, a way to disconnect from the noise of everyday life. But something went terribly wrong today. Maybe it was the new trail I decided to try, or maybe I had gotten too absorbed in my thoughts to pay attention to where I was going. For whatever reason, as the sun sank below the horizon, I found myself lost in unfamiliar terrain, with no clue how to get back to my car. My phone was useless, no service out here in the wilderness. The map I brought with me was soaked, ruined by an unexpected downpour earlier in the day. The ink had blurred into smudges of blue and green that no longer resembled any clear path. As the night deepened, the forest seemed to come alive with sounds that sent chills through my body. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of unseen creatures in the underbrush, and the unsettling snap of branches far too heavy for any small animal to cause. Then I saw it, a faint light through the trees. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, desperate to find something to hold on to. But as I drew closer, the light became clearer, revealing the shape of a cabin. My heart surged with relief. Civilization. Safety. I nearly sprinted towards it. The branches scratched at my face and arms, but I didn't care. All I could think about was getting inside, finding help, and ending this nightmare of a hike. When I finally reached the small clearing where the cabin stood, I paused to catch my breath and survey my surroundings. The cabin was modest and weathered. Its log walls had clearly weathered years of harsh conditions. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the stone chimney, a promise of warmth and comfort. The windows glowed with soft, amber light, spilling out onto the overgrown grass around the cabin. It looked almost magical, too perfect to be real. I stepped toward the door, my feet crunching on the gravel path. I hesitated for just a moment before knocking, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the silence of the forest. For a long time, there was no answer, and a flicker of unease crept in. What if no one was home? What if this was all just in my mind? But then I heard movement inside, the creak of floorboards, and the door swung open. The man who stood there was not what I expected. He was tall and lean, with a wild mane of gray hair and a beard that reached nearly to his chest. His eyes, a startling blue, seemed to pierce right through me. Well, he said, his voice rough as if from disuse. What do we have here? I stumbled over my words, suddenly feeling foolish and intrusive. I'm so sorry to bother you, sir. I got lost on a hike, and I saw your cabin. I was hoping I could use your phone to call for help. The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought he might slam the door in my face. But then his expression softened, and he stepped back, gesturing for me to enter. Come in. Come in. Can't leave you out here in the dark. Can I? Relief washed over me as I stepped inside. The cabin was small but cozy, with a crackling fire in the stone fireplace and shelves lined with books and odd trinkets. The man bustled about, pulling out a chair at the small wooden table. Sit, he insisted. You look half frozen. Let me get you something warm to drink. I sank into the chair gratefully, the warmth of the fire already beginning to seep into my chilled bones. Thank you so much, Mr. Gus, he said, filling a kettle with water. Just call me Gus. As Gus busied himself making tea, I took the opportunity to look around the cabin more closely. It was cluttered but clean, every surface covered with an eclectic mix of items. Old books with cracked spines sat next to delicate glass figurines. A collection of antique clocks ticked softly, each keeping its own time, and everywhere there were photographs, faded, sepia-toned images of people and places I didn't recognize. You have quite a collection, I said, trying to make conversation. Have you lived here long? Gus chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Oh, longer than you'd believe, my dear. This forest and I were old friends. He set a steaming mug of tea in front of me, the aromatic steam curling up invitingly. I wrapped my hands around it, savoring the warmth. It's beautiful out here, I said, but I can't imagine living so far from everything. Don't you get lonely? Something flashed in Gus's eyes. There and gone so quickly, I almost thought I'd imagined it. Lonely? No. I have everything I need right here. He gestured around the cabin. And sometimes, like tonight, the forest brings me company. I sipped my tea, a strange herbal blend that tasted of earth and something I couldn't quite place. About that phone call. Yes, Gus said, settling into the chair across from me. I'm afraid I don't have a phone out here. Never saw the need for one. My heart sank. Oh, I see. Well, could you perhaps point me in the direction of the nearest town? I could try to make it there in the morning. Gus leaned back, stroking his beard thoughtfully. The nearest town. Well, now that's quite a trek. Wouldn't be safe for you to attempt it on your own, especially not after a night in the woods. No, I think it's best if you stay here tonight. I can guide you out in the morning. I felt a flicker of unease. Stay the night with this stranger. But as I glanced out the window at the pitch-black forest beyond, I knew I didn't have much choice. The thought of stumbling around in the dark, possibly getting even more lost, was terrifying. That's very kind of you, I said, forcing a smile. If you're sure it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all, Gus said, his blue eyes twinkling. It's not often I get visitors. It'll be nice to have some company. As the night wore on, my initial unease began to fade. Gus was a fascinating conversationalist, full of stories about the forest and its history. He spoke of old legends, of spirits that roamed the woods and secrets hidden in the very trees themselves. I found myself drawn in, leaning forward to catch every word. But as captivating as his tales were, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way his eyes never seemed to leave me, watching my every move with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Or perhaps it was the way he deflected any questions about his own past, always turning the conversation back to me, probing for details about my life, my family, my reasons for being in the forest. As midnight approached, I began to feel drowsy. My limbs felt heavy, and my thoughts were fuzzy around the edges. Gus noticed my drooping eyelids and stood up. You must be exhausted, my dear. Let me show you where you can sleep. He led me to a small room off the main living area. A narrow bed was pushed against one wall, covered in a patchwork quilt. It's not much, Gus said apologetically, but it should be comfortable enough for one night. I thanked him, fighting to keep my eyes open. As soon as he left, closing the door behind him, I collapsed onto the bed. Despite my lingering unease, exhaustion won out, and I quickly fell into a deep sleep. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke with a start, my heart racing. Something had pulled me from my slumber, but I couldn't pinpoint what. The room was pitch black, the silence oppressive. I lay there for a moment, straining my ears, when I heard it, the soft creak of a floorboard just outside my door. My breath caught in my throat. Was Gus checking on me? Or the thought I'd been pushing away all night surfaced with terrifying clarity? What if his intentions were darker than I thought? Slowly, I sat up, trying to stay as silent as possible. My eyes had adjusted to the pitch-black surroundings, and I could just make out the faint outline of the door. The handle turned with agonizing slowness, and a wave of panic surged in my chest. At that moment, my survival instincts kicked in. I scanned the room desperately, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand landed on something solid, a thick book from the bedside table. I gripped it tightly, my palms clammy, as the door creaked open. A thin sliver of light peeked through, widening as the door inched inward. I tensed, prepared to spring into action, when a voice spoke softly. "Are you awake, my dear? I thought I heard you moving." It was Gus, his figure outlined in the doorway. I immediately relaxed my grip on the book, feeling silly for my earlier fear. "Yes," I said, trying to steady my shaking voice. "I'm awake. Is everything okay?" "Oh, yes," Gus replied, stepping inside. "Everything's just fine. I was just thinking. It's such a beautiful night," he continued. "Maybe you'd like to join me for a walk. A walk in the middle of the night." Every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong, that I needed to escape. But as I tried to speak, to refuse, I was horrified to find that I couldn't move.